CD 4.
Chapter 8. Bernard trudged wearily in the direction of his new flat. The day had been exhausting, although not altogether unsatisfying. Professionally, it was disappointing that they didn't seem to be any closer to tracking down Helen Sopel, although on a positive note, there was nothing in their investigation that suggested they'd be finding her body imminently, with or without a suicide note. On a personal level, he felt a modicum of pride in how he'd handled himself today. Maitland hadn't been barking completely up the wrong tree about him passing his business card to Lucy. He had pulled off something not a million miles away from asking a woman out, and he had a pretty much open invitation to go back to the museum. After all, he was a member. He had also got all the way through a meeting with the supremely scary Mr. Stuttle without humiliating himself, which was more than could be said for Maitland, who really ought to have been there. After all, he had been the one who made the call. But Carol had appeared when they were debating what to do, and persuaded Maitland that his best option was to clock off at 5 and worry about it in the morning. When Bernard had protested, she'd told him he was a job's worth and flounced out, a grinning Maitland hot on her heels. So it had been left to Bernard to phone Mr. Patterson, who'd laughed solidly for a full minute when he'd explained about Jonathan Carmichael, before telling him to get his arse along to the meeting with Stuttle. And now, at long last, he was heading home, a bag of mixed vegetables in his hand. In round about 15 minutes, he'd have a lovely stir-fry to eat in front of whatever tonight's documentary was on BBC4. Or maybe he'd spend a while hunting for the Guide to the Edinburgh Museum of Plagues and Pandemics that he'd bought on one of his earlier visits. He'd familiarise himself with their range of exhibits, just in case, well, you know. He turned onto the driveway for his flats and was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't see a figure detach itself from the shadows and step toward him. "Bernard?" He jumped a good 6 inches in the air, his shopping bag swinging against his knees. "I need to talk to you." "Now?" "Now." For a man who was desperate to talk, Bryce was taking a long time to say anything. He'd remained stumm all the way up the stairs, then sat silently in the living room while Bernard made them both tea. As Bernard plonked a mug of tea in front of his mute friend, he decided to hurry matters along a little. He'd like to get the stir-fry cooked and eaten, and still have a good long bath before bed. "You needed to talk." This provoked a long sigh and a burst of head shaking. "This just feels really, disloyal." "Are we talking about Marcus?" "I probably shouldn't say anything." Bernard resisted the temptation to agree. He sneaked a look at his watch. He'd have to forget about the bath. At this rate, he'd be eating his tea in front of Newsnight, while the next hour was going to be spent dragging information piece by piece from Bryce. Information that he wasn't sure he even wanted in the first place. "No!" Bryce banged a fist on the table, making Bernard jump for the second time that evening. "No." His friend seemed to be having some kind of argument with himself that Bernard wasn't party to. At least, he appeared to have come to some decision. "I've decided I have to speak up." He took a deep breath. "I think Marcus is in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "I think he's got himself addicted to online gambling." "Really?" Bernard couldn't imagine Marcus doing anything quite that stupid. "I'm afraid so." Bryce gave a sad shake of his head. "He invented what he described as an infallible system for winning at online roulette, based on what he thought were predictabilities in the program's algorithms." That did sound more like Marcus. And was it infallible? Nope. And he's lost a fortune, used up all his overdraft and maxed out his credit cards. Bernard sighed. "That's really, really stupid. You don't have to tell me, but what really worries me is that I think he's still gambling." "How? He can't have any money." "Well, possibly." Bryce looked uncomfortable. "Marcus and I, as you know, spend a lot of time in different forums, and every so often we may, carelessly, let slip that we work for the government." "That's super stupid." Bernard redoubled his sighing and added a tut for good measure. "And could probably get you both sacked." Probably, but we don't use our real names, obviously, or say anything that could identify us. This still sounded ridiculously risky to Bernard. He'd never told anyone he worked for the Het if he could possibly avoid it. Although, to be fair, that was less about security and more about the ever-present worry that he would be ranted at about the Het's infringement of civil liberties. And from time to time, people make approaches to us offering us money for information. Who? It was news to him that they had anything worth selling. Why? The why varies with the who. We get approached by people who want to sell IT services to SHEP, people who are looking for evidence to undermine SHEP, conspiracy theorists who want to know what's really going on, journalists. Bernard thought about the recent leaks at the Het. You think he might be tempted? I'm afraid there's a very real possibility that he's already given in to temptation. Bernard slumped back in his chair. What can we do? Should I speak to him? No. Bryce shook his head vigorously. He'll only deny it. I'm going to try and keep track of what he's up to, but if you notice anything untoward at work, try and cover for him. I'm not sure I can do that, said Bernard doubtfully. He wasn't sure that ethically he was prepared to cover for someone who might be leaking Het secrets. More practically, he wasn't sure that he had the deceptive ability to participate in a cover-up. His woeful inability to lie convincingly was one of the many things that Maitland berated him about. He's our friend, Bernard. We need to try and help him. I know, but at the very least, can you tell me if you spot any leaks or anything else? And let me know if you think Patterson or Stuttle are onto him. Then I've got a chance to warn him, if nothing else. He sighed. Okay. Chapter 9. There were 3 missed calls on Mona's mobile, all of them from Elaine. Hell would freeze over before she phoned her back. For all that she'd met Elaine on a dating site, she was, and remained, a member of the press. There was only one reason that a journalist would be getting in touch with her. She would be making contact to see if she could get any more gossip out of Mona about the current state of the Het, and God knows she'd already been indiscreet enough. If she got out of this without providing featured content for a Cassandra Doom column, she'd be lucky. Do you want a cup of tea, Mona? Her mother's voice drifted up to her. I'm putting the kettle on. No thanks. An hour ago she'd sat through a full meal of pork chops, roast potatoes and veg, followed by an apple tart and custard. There was a vague feeling at the back of her mind that this might have been her favourite meal at some point in her childhood. She'd been touched by her mother's efforts, particularly given the current state of her health, but had also been extremely keen to get back to her room to plan what she was going to do next. It would take more than the offer of tea to lure her downstairs. She put her mobile with its accusatory missed calls back into her bag. Oh God, what a mess. What had possessed her to sign up to internet dating? At the time it had seemed easier than meeting people face to face. She'd been unable to picture herself making small talk in a bar or over dinner with a group of women that she might have nothing in common with except her sexuality. Internet dating had seemed a good way to get to know someone before committing to meet. When she'd met Elaine in person, her critical faculties should have kicked in. But the amount of alcohol she'd consumed on their date meant that she'd lost whatever common sense she had in the bottom of a wine glass. At least she could go back and check what she'd said when they chatted online. You heard all these scare stories about people being unwittingly infected by talking to people they didn't know over the internet. Could Elaine have unleashed some tracking device onto her laptop or her phone that let her read her files? Had she given her a route into eavesdropping on current activity at the Het? Was that even possible, or was she having a massive bout of paranoia? She really needed to talk to someone who understood computers, but she didn't fancy confessing to Marcus or Bernard or the other geek from IT what she'd been up to. It would have to involve starting from the first principle of explaining why she'd been on a date with a woman, for one thing. She was pretty sure that would come as a revelation to her colleagues. Maybe she was just being paranoid, but given the sensitivity of what she had planned for the rest of the evening, she wasn't willing to take the risk. If she couldn't use her laptop or her mobile, Her evening's activities were going to involve a library and a call box, two things that she hadn't used since she was a teenager. Time to find out if such things still existed in her neighbourhood. Morningside Library was an oasis of calm after the stress of her day. The librarian, a well-heeled woman in her 50s, had been delighted to assist with her request for a library card. It was very important, she'd said, that people continued to use the library, as funding for the service was always under threat. Mona had nodded a little guiltily. The only time she'd been in a library recently was when they'd tracked an elderly male health defaulter down to Blackhall Library, where he'd been sound asleep under a copy of the Scottish Daily Express. Her temporary library card secured, she relocated to a computer terminal. The paranoia she'd experienced over the past few days was still in full flow. She gave a furtive look round to make sure that no one had followed her here. There were two teenage boys huddled round a computer on the other side of the table from her, and three older ladies who were browsing the stacks. Unless she was being pursued by a master of disguise who could carry off a convincing Morningside matron, she could probably assume that nobody was interested in her and her internet surfing. After all the preamble, she had an answer to her question in only a couple of internet searches. She needed a phone number, and the power of Google had presented her with 3 possible options. Now all she had to do was locate a payphone. She considered asking the librarian, but given the high level of customer service she'd experienced so far, there was a danger she'd be offered the use of a phone, and what would she say then? No thanks, I'm trying to contact someone without leaving a trace. Picking up her printout, she headed out onto the Morningside Road. Payphones were few and far between. Should she start walking in the hope she stumbled across one, or should she ask a passer-by? The most likely place would be at Morningside Station, she guessed, unless something on the other side of the road caught her eye. Unless there was one very close by indeed. She stood on the curb to allow a bus to pass, then ran over the road to confirm her suspicions that this was a phone box. With one hand she pulled the door open. Her other hand had its fingers firmly crossed in the hope that this one contained a fully functioning phone. A deeply unpleasant smell hit her nose. Looking down, she could see a large puddle, the origins of which she decided not to dwell on. Placing a foot on each shore, she pulled out the list of numbers and dialed the first one. It returned a dead tone, which was unhelpful but at least conclusive. She could strike it off the list. The second number put her in touch with an elderly and apparently quite deaf man who couldn't make sense of her request. He got a question mark next to his number. She sighed and dialed for the last time. A woman answered. "Is that Teresa Kilsyth?" There were a few seconds of silence. "Who is this?" The voice was imperious, posh Edinburgh and unmistakably Mrs. Kilsyth. "This is Mona White." Another silence followed. "From the health enforcement team?" "I know who you are." Teresa's voice dripped with irritation. "I don't know why you are ringing me." "I rang the university, but they said neither you nor the professor was working there now. So you thought you'd harass me at home instead. I'm hanging up now. Don't." Mona realised she'd have to dive right in. Did the professor really have a heart attack, or did someone get to him? "Well, you would know more about that than me, Mona. I left him with your people. I trusted you all to take care of him. Believe me, Mrs. Kilsyth, they are not my people. I don't trust any of them, and I don't think Professor Bertram Fowler did either." "A bit late in the day, Mona, for these discussions. Good, don't hang up. They're asking me about the professor. They want to know what he told me when we were in London." The phone sighed. "Where are you phoning from? Are you on a mobile?" "No." "Your landline? Your office landline?" "I'm at the call box on Morningside High Street." There was a dry laugh. "Well, at least you've learned something. If you want to come round here immediately, I'll talk to you. I assume you know where I live." The phone went dead. Teresa placed an unasked-for cup of coffee in front of Mona. "I don't have any milk, I'm afraid. I don't take it myself. Black is fine." After only a couple of sips, she felt her heart racing. Mrs. Kilsyth liked her coffee strong. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I'm not sure this is a good idea." Teresa sat down opposite her. She looked as small and trim as Mona remembered, but the events of the last couple of months had taken their toll. She seemed to have lost some of her energy and now looked like a woman on the verge of retirement, which, Mona supposed, she actually was. I very much doubt I'm going to give you whatever it is you want. What I want to know more than anything is that the Professor is okay. Is he? Is Sandy okay? She seemed to mull this over. Well, he's still alive, still breathing, which he could very well not be. There were a few scary moments in the hospital where we nearly lost him. I tried phoning lots of times, but I could never get anyone to answer his mobile. Teresa waved this away. Yes, everyone and their dog was phoning to speak to him. Colleagues, students, journalists, well-wishers of all kinds. I turned the phone off and stuck it in the drawer. He didn't need that kind of nonsense in his condition. Oh, and thank your boss, Cameron Stuttle, for the lovely bunch of flowers he sent. That was a very nice touch. She glared at her. Teresa, She held up her hand. Before you go on, I think there are a few things you need to know. The first thing is that I haven't actually seen Sandy since he was released from hospital. Since he came home, he hasn't answered my calls, and he won't come to the door when I attempt to visit. Mona was shocked. But you two were so close. We both worked 60-hour weeks at the university. We shared an office. We went on holiday together. There is nothing I do not know about that man, which is why I can say I'm not surprised that he has cut off contact. Mona frowned, trying to take this in. You might understand that, Teresa, but I don't. Surely he needs you now more than ever. Sandy has never been one to put his own needs first, but we'll come to that. The second thing you need to know, as the events of the past few months have made crystal clear, is that Sandy has made some pretty powerful enemies in the course of his work, like Carlotta Carmichael. Teresa snorted. That self-important little trollop. She was the least of his worries. She's very much a sideshow. The real circus is elsewhere. She shook her head at the thought. And the third thing you need to know is that the jaunt that Sandy was sent on to London worked a treat. Really? I thought the whole thing was a disaster for both Shep and Police Scotland. Oh yes, it was a cock-up from start to finish for them. But the darker forces that were out there got exactly what they wanted. Overnight, Sandy went from being a fusty old workaholic professor without wife or children or grandchildren to a happy family man. I don't get it. He went from being a man with nothing, or at least very little to lose, to a man who was susceptible to pressure. He became a person who could be manipulated, leaned on not to discuss certain unfortunate topics. Mona's face must still have been portraying her inner confusion, because Teresa leaned forward and started speaking very slowly, as if she was spelling out a difficult lesson to a child. He would have done anything for his daughter. He'd spent years looking for her. My guess is after his heart attack, certain people suggested to him that they know where his daughter lives. They know she is pregnant, and that if they can give the professor a cardiac episode, think what they could do to an expectant mother. Do you know who these people are? I have my suspicions. We need to help the professor. How, dear? Do you have a plan? There was an air of sarcasm to her tone. No, but, well... She stopped, flustered. But I think the professor wants me to help him. He gave me a hug when I left him with the Police Scotland guys, if that's who they really are. I doubt it very much. And in the course of the hug he slipped a business card into my pocket, which he'd written something on. What did it say? Teresa contemplated her fingernails, feigning indifference. Follow the orders of Hilda Millwood, all in capitals. I don't know what it means, but... She tailed off as she caught the expression on Teresa's face. You know what this means, don't you? She didn't respond. Teresa, are you Hilda Millwood? Is it a name that Professor Bertram Fowler uses for you? I thought perhaps he was trying to get me to speak to you. It has absolutely nothing to do with me, she snapped. I'm sorry, Mona. Teresa reached over and took hold of her hand. Listen to me and take the advice of an old woman. Leave all this alone. Messing around with this will get you and yours into all kinds of trouble. My only relative is my mother, Teresa, and she's lucky if she's got 6 months left. I've got no partner and no children. I'm not sure I've got anything to lose either. You stupid girl. She dropped her hand. The professor is extremely high profile, which makes him difficult to kill. You, on the other hand, are a junior functionary. You can have an accident at any time they want, and they won't even have to worry about your grieving widower. But forget about Sandy. Forget about whatever nonsense he has told you and get on with living your life. She stood up. And please, don't come here again. Wednesday. Chimps. Chapter 1. Bernard had awoken, refreshed and rejuvenated, after a good night's sleep in his new flat. The only thing that had prevented him getting his full 8 hours was the fact that he'd woken just before 6, and Bryce's comments about Marcus had started playing over and over in his head. It was hard to imagine his friend being so idiotic. But then Marcus did possess the particular brand of stupidity that came from continually being the cleverest person in the room. It was the kind of stupidity that made him immune to sarcasm, rendered him incapable of recognising signs of boredom on other people's faces, and prevented him from realising that you were never, ever going to get one over on a website that was probably run by the Russian mafia. At 6:05 he got out of bed. Bernard knew from bitter experience that lying awake imagining the worst that could happen was generally more unpleasant than getting up and actually facing the music. So he decided to steal a march on the day and get into work early. A peaceful walk through deserted streets, followed by an hour of clearing his emails before everyone else turned up, would be a pretty good start to his morning. Marcus notwithstanding, he had a good feeling about the day. Today could be the day they found Helen Sopel alive and well, and escorted her to her health check. And he would have a perfect excuse to nip round to the museum and thank Lucy for her help. The streets around his flat were as quiet as he'd hoped, although the nearer he got to the town centre, the more other early birds he encountered. There were a surprising number of people on the streets near his work. For some reason, everyone seemed to have decided to come in early. The little park opposite their offices was full of people, students from the look of them. He wondered if this was the remnants of some outdoor party that had taken place overnight. There were at least 20 of them, which was clearly breaking the prohibition on meeting up in large groups. They'd be attracting the attention of his colleagues at Shep if they didn't move on soon. There was a lone student sitting on the bottom step of a small stone flight that led up to the front door of the Cathcart building. "I'm afraid we don't open for another hour," he smiled apologetically. The young man just stared back at him. Bernard was still mulling over this silent visitor as he pulled the door carefully shut behind him. He heard footsteps clattering down the stairs and wondered which of his colleagues had also made it into work for 7:30. As the footsteps drew nearer, he realised it wasn't anyone from the Het. A tall, dark-haired man was heading toward him at some speed. Bernard was about to challenge him when he realised that he looked familiar, although he couldn't immediately place him. Hello?" The man ignored him, and rather than going out the front door, headed down the corridor to the fire exit. "Don't open that, you'll trigger the alarm." His warning was ignored. The man pushed the emergency bar and left without looking back. Bernard braced himself for a high-pitched electronic wail, but nothing happened. The door slammed shut, the noise echoing round the empty stairwell, leaving Bernard staring at it in confusion. His confusion deepened when he made it to the Het office. Patterson was already there, locked in conversation with Stuttle. The sight of the head of Shep jogged his memory, and he realised where he'd seen the mystery man before. "I just saw Paul Shore leaving." "No, you didn't," said Stuttle. "No, I really did. Bernard stopped. He realised from the expression on his boss's and his boss's boss's face that he'd got it wrong. This was one of the times when Het reality was at odds with actual reality as he perceived it. And he hadn't just seen Carlotta Carmichael's parliamentary secretary leaving their offices after a secret meeting. Well, whoever it was, he left via the emergency exit. "Tut, tut," said Stuttle, grinning to himself. A visitor leaving via the tradesman's entrance. Better check the silverware's all still there, John." "Don't worry about it, Bernard," said Patterson. "I am worried. The alarm didn't go off when he opened the door. Should I phone the facilities manager and get him to check it?" Stuttle's face, unlike the emergency exit, registered alarm. Bernard realised with slight embarrassment that the Shep boss had been responsible for the security breach, no doubt so that Paul Shore could sneak into the building. The door system forced you to present your green card on entry, providing a neat register of everyone who had been in the building. No doubt this would have interfered with Stuttle's intention to pretend the meeting had never happened. "No, don't go doing that. John, you'll get this sorted out." "Of course. What are you doing in so early anyway, Bernard?" Wishing I'd stayed in bed, he thought. "Working, finding Helen Sopel." Good, good. Dedicated team you've got here, John. Perhaps we can continue our discussion in the cafeteria and give Bernard here some peace." A welcome silence filled the room. As soon as Patterson and Stuttle were out of sight, he hurried to Maitland's desk and retrieved the key to the office cupboard. With a glance over his shoulder in case his bosses had returned, he opened it. To his relief, the box with Helen Sopel's emergency information was still there. Although he remembered putting it on the second shelf, it seemed to have migrated overnight to the third, almost like someone around 5'8" tall had put it away last night, only for someone taller to put it back this morning. Patterson, Stuttle, and Paul Shore were all, by his estimation, at least 6 foot tall. Bernard pulled the box out and leafed through it, and had a second burst of relief when he found all the contents were still there. He quickly repacked it, then paused for a moment, deciding which shelf to put it back on. He opted for the second. He leaned against the cupboard and tried to work out what Shore had been doing there. Was he there so that he could go back and warn Miss Carmichael about its contents, or there so he could help identify the significance of the items? If they were significant, would anyone even bother to tell them? The sound of voices drifted in from outside. He walked over to the window and saw that the number of people in the park seemed to have increased. This ruined his theory that it was the remnants of a student party. This wasn't the dying embers of an event. This looked like something just about to start. A few of the students were wearing scarves over their faces. What was going on? "Hello," Marcus was standing in the doorway. "Hi, have you seen what's going on out there?" "I certainly have. I actually came to warn you that there were plans on the Twittersphere for a demonstration outside your office, but I appear to be a little late." "So it's a demonstration?" "Thought it was some kind of student party." "Alas, no." Marcus gave his usual goofy grin, and Bernard's thoughts turned from the demo to his conversation with Bryce. This opportunity to talk to Marcus had been unexpected, but the empty office did make this the perfect time to offer some support. "So, how are you?" Bernard smiled at his friend. To be honest, he didn't look like a man deep in debt and doing dirty deeds. He could, of course, also be deep in denial. "Fine, fine. Missing my house guest, of course, and our cosy late-night chats." "All right. Yes, I'm missing you too," he lied. "But you're okay, not worrying about anything?" "Actually, right now, I'm mainly worrying that Mr. Stuttle will somehow see the demonstration outside as my fault. He has a worrying tendency to blame whoever tells him bad news for actually causing it. Mr. Patterson does exactly the same thing. He always shoots the messenger." Realising he was heading off topic, he resumed his theme. "But, personally, you're okay. Is this about Mona?" Marcus looked suspicious. He'd had a crush on her for as long as Bernard had known him. "You trying to tell me some bad news? She got a boyfriend, hasn't she?" The news on the Mona front was much, much worse than Marcus could imagine, but this probably wasn't the time to tell him. He was saved from making a decision by the arrival of the woman herself. She walked straight past them and headed for the window. "Have you seen the crowd out there? Does the Gov know?" "He's downstairs having a coffee with Stuttle, so he's going to find out pretty soon." "Oh, well, they can sort it then." She turned her attention to Marcus, who had been busily engaged in staring at her. "My computer's making a terrible noise. Any chance you could, while you're here?" Delighted to help. He reached into his pocket and, with a flourish, produced a small screwdriver. When did you last dust the hard drive? Never. Tisk Mona. No one ever takes proper care of the hardware. He knelt down at the side of her desk, a move which led her to back her chair quite rapidly away. He burrowed underneath it and started dismantling. I've been keeping an eye on the hashtag I mentioned. Marcus's voice was slightly muffled. There's a lot of people out there who are convinced that the Het are up to something. Consensus is that these civil servant deaths are sinister, and you lot are covering something up. What is going on out there? Stuttle and Patterson had returned from their plotting session in the canteen. Stuttle wound his way through the office and stood staring out of the window. It's a Twitter mob, Mr. Stuttle, said Bernard. Twitter? I thought we'd paid that prick from IT to monitor these things. Marcus popped up from underneath Mona's desk, screwdriver in hand. He'd been bang on the money about getting the blame. Stuttle looked surprised to see him, but not particularly apologetic for the insult. I have been, Mr. Stuttle. The hashtag started going really crazy about 2 a.m, so I thought I'd better pop in and warn everyone that they might have a bit of difficulty getting into the office this morning. One of the tools out there is carrying a placard with "What do they know" on it, said Stuttle. Like that bloody hashtag thing you were rabbiting on about. Patterson stood by the window looking out at the scene below. You know how you said that if word got out about McVee's death and Sopel being missing, there would be panic cam? Yes. That doesn't look like panic to me. That looks like a pretty damn well-organised demonstration. Stuttle thought this over for a second. Marcus, you follow all these internet nut jobs. Who's responsible for this? Hard to say, Mr. Stuttle. There's a lot of people posting against that particular hashtag. There are a couple of particularly prolific tweeters, but none of the ones who were calling for this illegal demonstration were using their own names, obviously. Bernard raised his hand. I have a question. As always, muttered Patterson. Why are they doing this? Are they genuinely concerned, or is there some other motive? And why North Edinburgh Het and not Shep's offices? I can answer the second question, said Stuttle. They'd never get near our place with the level of security we have. Yeah, God forbid that the masses should storm the magnificent staircases of the city chambers. Shut up, John. And as for the why, I don't think we know that yet. Maitland and Carol appeared, giggling. Stuttle looked at his watch. Glad you could finally make it. Carol's expression changed to a look of fury. Bernard winced. He hated confrontation. Sympathetic as he was to Carol's feelings, he didn't think there was a lot of point in having a showdown with her ultimate boss. She appeared to feel differently and walked over until she was inches away from Stuttle. Bernard thought that this was far, far closer than he would care to risk. Getting that close to Stuttle was like putting yourself within mauling distance of a grizzly bear. Legend had it that the front benches of the British Houses of Parliament were 2 sword lengths apart. This seemed to Bernard to be an appropriate distance to keep from the head of Shep. 2 sword lengths would give you time, if not to draw a weapon, at least to start running. We've both just risked life and limb fighting our way through an aggressive mob of protesters. Her voice was quiet, but extremely firm. And when we got here, what do we find? Certainly not any concern from senior management about our well-being. No, instead, we get a telling off for being late, as if we were naughty school children rather than 2 employees who have just run the gauntlet of protesters out there. What are you planning to do to keep your staff safe? I'm on the case, Carol. Stuttle aimed for a reassuring tone, one that implied he was on top of the situation and normal service would be resumed imminently. He didn't quite carry it off. And exactly what are you planning to do, Mr. Stuttle? We can't safely get back out of the building. We're trapped here. We don't know what their plans are. They could be about to start lobbing Molotov cocktails for all we know. What's your immediate advice? Stuttle didn't respond. It's not just the Het either. What about the other staff in the building? Some of the girls in the admin team are very upset." A vision of Marguerite ramping up the amateur dramatics downstairs went through Bernard's head. Stuttle probably had more to fear in getting past the admin office than from the protesters. The sound of singing started outside. "Oh, God, there's more of them." Stuttle peered out of the window. "Right, I take your point, Carol. No one is to venture out there until we get this sorted. John, can I borrow your office? I need to make a few calls and get that lot shifted." Chapter 2. Mona was shrouded in a fog of irritation. Her colleagues were being very annoying. She'd phoned Ian, as a courtesy, to warn him not to come into the head office. He'd responded with a slightly impatient comment about not intending to come over that morning anyway, followed by his opinion that the protest was all a bit of nonsense and the het should just man up and get on with things. She'd hung up at that point. Bernard, who had the ability to irritate her just by breathing, was obviously fretting about the situation. She could see he was busily flicking between the BBC News website and various self-help websites, suggesting how to protect yourself against a potentially armed and angry mob, interspersed with anxious trips to the window. Her one consolation was that Stuttle had sent Marcus off somewhere, so that at least she didn't have to listen to him prattle on. But most of her ire was directed at Maitland and Carol. They were making no pretence at work and seemed to be playing some kind of tennis-type game with balled-up bits of paper. Mona caught Patterson's eye. He was already annoyed enough at being evicted from his own office without having to witness his staff's blatant work avoidance. "Maitland, do you not have something you could be working on?" "Bit tricky, Gov, what with us being stuck in the building." "Well, find something to do." Carol tutted. "We're both still stressed about getting into work this morning. This is very threatening, being trapped in here. I don't think we're calm enough to work." "Yes, I thought that," said Patterson. "I was listening to the both of you giggling over there, and I thought the two of them sound exactly like they're too stressed to work. Maitland, find something to do before I find it for you." Maitland reluctantly slid over to his own computer, while Carol sat and glared at Patterson. Mona hoped she had a really good lawyer, because if she did end up remaining at the Het, there was no way Patterson would forget all this. There was silence for all of 2 seconds before Bernard piped up. "I think that's the police here." There was a roar from the crowd. "Oh, that's bad, they're throwing things at the police." The office abandoned any pretense at work and joined Bernard at the window. By Mona's estimate, they were now between 70 and 80 protesters in and around the park, predominantly male, many of them with their faces covered by scarves. To her mind, this didn't signify a commitment to peaceful protest. "Oh no, they're ripping up the flower beds." Bernard looked outraged. "Not just the flowers, look." Maitland pointed at a group of protesters who were doing their level best to throw a park bench at the police. "I'm glad we didn't venture out there," said Bernard. "At least the police have got riot gear on." "You'd still get your arse kicked even if you were in riot gear," said Maitland. "Don't be mean," said Mona. "It's a fact." Maitland grinned. "You'd be fine though, Mona, what with you being a bit on the butch side." One of these days, she would snap and throttle him. "I'm not butch. I'm just tougher than you are, loser." "Yeah," he upped the grin to a full-blown smirk. "Must be a lesbian thing." She frowned. Was he just being his usual annoying self, or did he actually know? "The what?" "The you being a lesbian thing. We know about it." Mona's head whipped in the direction of Patterson, who was looking so uncomfortable he could have been seated on hot coals. She knew exactly who was to blame for this. "This is bloody Ian Jacobson, isn't it? Outing me." "Well, actually," began Bernard. "Mona," said Patterson loudly, "the important thing is that it's out there now, everyone knows." "I didn't until just now," said Carol. "Well, so now it's out there, we can all just get on with life." "I suppose so," she said doubtfully. In truth, it wasn't the end of the world that everyone knew. It saved her having some awkward conversations. "But I'm still going to kill Ian." The door to their office flew open, and Marguerite rushed in and straight into Patterson's office. "Mr. Patterson?" "He's not in there." "Oh, Mr. Stuttle?" She reappeared again, looking even more flustered. I'm here, Marguerite. Patterson stepped forward. What's the panic? We just took a phone call downstairs. Someone said there's a bomb on the premises. He says we've got 15 minutes to get out. Chapter 3. This is total bullshit. Maitland peered round the side of a fire engine. There's no way there's actually a bomb in there. I know, said Patterson, but Stuttle wasn't going to take the risk of you lot being blown sky high. Me, I'd have taken my chances. It had been a busy hour. Bernard thought that he might have scored himself some brownie points with Stuttle, as he had been the only member of the team, including Patterson, who had been able to immediately lay his hand on the building's evacuation policy. It was nestled in a plastic pocket 3 documents along from his contract. Stuttle had snatched it out of his hand and set about putting it into action. With an efficiency that Bernard could only admire, Patterson had managed to get all the staff out of the back door of the building and evacuated to a safe distance without anyone being trampled, while Stuttle had yelled loudly and authoritatively at one of the riot police at the front of the building until they'd got sufficient reinforcements to drive the protesters back to a safe distance. Bernard might not have the fondest feelings toward his line management structure, but he had to admit they came into their own in a crisis. Stuttle appeared in Bernard's line of sight, deep in conversation with a police officer Bernard didn't recognise, but whose epaulette silverware declared her to be someone very important indeed. Oh my God! Marguerite's distinctive tone interrupted his thoughts. That was worse than the whole bomb thing. What was? Talking to Stuttle and that woman. Patterson smiled. I'll tell him that, shall I? Marguerite would rather get blown up than talk to you and Assistant Chief Constable Callahan. Don't you dare, Mr. Patterson. She waved an admonitory finger at him. Enough of your joking. My nerves are shot. So what did you tell them? She sighed. Well, they wanted to know all about the phone call. I said it was a man. And what else? She looked embarrassed. I couldn't really remember. I got such a fright when he said there was a bomb that I wasn't really paying attention. Was he Scottish? Yes, she said confidently, her face clouded over. At least, I think so. Young? Old? She shrugged. I'm not sure. Excellent work, Marguerite. They'll be able to narrow down the search to 50% of the population. Coffees as requested. Mona had returned from her quest, bearing 4 cups. Sorry, Marge, I didn't know you were back. Marguerite tutted and walked off. I really didn't know she was here, said Mona. It wasn't you, said Maitland. She's got the hump because the Gov complained about her bomb hoax message-taking skills. Where's Carol? Asked Patterson. She decided she was too stressed by events to come back. Sorry, Gov. Mona passed him his coffee. He rolled his eyes. Probably for the best. Well, there's no point in you lot hanging around either. Maitland and Bernard, you go back to the museum and try and doorstop the director. Oh, Bernard, you're in luck. Maitland made kissing noises. Why is he doing that? Asked Patterson. Because I love museums so much. He glared up at Maitland. Shut up. Anything I can be getting on with, Gov? Asked Mona. Plenty. First you can track down Ian Jacobson and ask him if he's got a meeting room he can borrow, so that the 3 of us can do some preparation. What for, Gov? An interview that's going to require more tact and discretion than anything you've ever done before. He stopped for a slurp of his coffee. Stuttle's got us an interview at 4 this afternoon with Carlotta and Jonathan Carmichael. Together. As I said, tact and diplomacy are going to be essential. Mona looked at Bernard, and he smiled sympathetically. Tact and diplomacy, not Mr. Patterson's skill set. Chapter 4. So this time are you going to actually grow a pair and ask that big-nosed bird out? Her nose wasn't that big, and no, I'm not planning to ask her out. Why not? The woman is so dull that not only does she have a membership of a museum, she actually works in one. You're a perfect match. People who work in museums aren't dull. They're just not ignorant like you. Anyway, she might not be there. He wondered if, somewhere beneath Maitland's appalling phrasing, he was right. Was he in with a chance? Should he be making some kind of move? He wasn't sure his nerves were up to any more excitement today, and he was absolutely certain that he wasn't going to make any advances to Lucy with Maitland standing by. So he decided to focus on the investigation. "What are we going to say to this woman anyway?" he asked. "Well, I think, given that she's friends with one of the people attending the meeting, she knows more about this than she's saying. And why didn't she acknowledge in the diary who was meeting here? Don't know. And add all that to the fact that she stood us up, I think she's dodgy. Well, we're here, so try and keep that feeling under wraps." Bernard was pleased to see that the museum door was wide open this time. He hurried through and stopped at the reception desk, which had a very elderly woman sat behind it. "We're here to see Karina McFarlane." Who?" "The director." "Oh, I don't know anything about that." "Could you ring her?" The woman gazed at them. Bernard thought for a second she was going to query that, but very slowly, and it appeared painfully, she got up from her seat. "I'll find Lucy. You two sign in." Maitland waited until her back was turned and elbowed him in the ribs. "It's your bird." "Do not say anything to her, Maitland." "I'm promising nothing," he smirked. "Oh, it's you two." Lucy came bustling in. "Hello again. I'm sorry Mrs. Cartwright couldn't help you." She lowered her voice. "I don't think she quite heard what you were asking. Can I ask you to—" She gestured at the green card box on the wall. "Oh, of course." In turn, they presented their cards and waited until the machine beeped. "I'll take you upstairs. I'm sure Karina will be delighted you've caught her." The look on Karina McFarlane's face when they appeared in her office doorway conveyed many emotions, none of which corresponded with delight. She quickly recovered herself. "Thank you, Lucy." She stood up to shake their hands. "Sorry about the confusion over our previous meeting." "No problem," said Bernard. "We do have a few questions, though." There was a brief pause. "Lucy, you'd better get back downstairs. I don't like to leave our entire front desk security to Mrs. Cartwright." "Oh, okay." She waited until Lucy left, then closed the door and turned to them both. "You had questions?" "We do," said Bernard. "We want to talk to you about a series of meetings that were held here at the museum, particularly one on Friday the 4th of September. I'm not sure how much help I can be." "Why were the civil servants meeting here? They have a number of buildings of their own that surely they could have used." She shrugged. "I understand there was a certain amount of pressure on their meeting rooms. But Lucy said the meetings were mainly in the evening. I can't imagine that the Scottish Government would be short of meeting rooms out of hours." Maitland's phone pinged. "Excuse me, I need to take this." Bernard felt a sense of alarm. He was mildly perturbed at the thought of carrying on with the interview solo, and deeply disturbed at the thought that Maitland was roaming around the building with an imminent risk of bumping into Lucy. He tried to focus. "So they were fully booked for evening meetings. I don't know if it was a capacity issue or if it was more difficult to get someone to open and close the building after hours. You'd really have to talk to the Scottish Government directly." "I'd like to, Miss McFarlane, but as you are probably aware, 2 of the people who attended those meetings are now dead, and Helen Sopel is missing." Her hand went to her mouth. "Helen is missing? Didn't you know? She missed her health check, hence our involvement." "I didn't realise. I thought you wanted to talk to me because—" "Never mind. I can't believe Helen missed her health check." "Yes, a career-ending move. Not something she would have done if she could possibly help it. Therefore, as you can imagine, we're very worried about her. So, if you have any information about these meetings, it would really help." This was met with silence. He decided to nudge her. "We're meeting Carlotta Carmichael to discuss her involvement in the meetings." This provoked a furious hiss. Miss Carmichael seemed to cause that response in a lot of people. "That woman won't be able to help. She only attended the last meeting before—" She leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "You know, Nat was a good friend of mine." Lucy said, "Do you think his death was suicide?" "Yes, of course," she nodded. "That's what the police are saying, isn't it?" "Yes. Do you have any idea what might have driven him to that?" She sighed. "I don't suppose any of this can hurt him now. I'll tell you what I know, which, frankly, isn't much. I know that Nat had been really unhappy for the past few months." "Unhappy at work?" I'm just not sure he was cut out for all the pressures involved in dealing with the virus. How well did he get on with his colleagues? Fine, I think. And Mrs. Carmichael? I really wouldn't know about that. She pushed her chair back and stood up. Why don't you ask her when you meet her? Maitland was sitting on the front steps of the museum, a cigarette in his mouth. Does Kate know you're still smoking? Nope, he said, getting to his feet. And if you tell her, I'll kill you. Anyway, you owe me one. He felt a cold, icy hand grasp his heart. Oh, God, what did you do? He grinned. First of all, I played the old make your phone ring trick to get out of that extremely tedious interview. Then I wandered down to see your future girlfriend and had a very cosy chat about the museum's accounts. Accounts? Yep. I was thinking about her comments the other day. So she tells me that Karina keeps all that stuff very close to her chest. Password-protected files on the computer, etc. But she did reiterate her comments about what good shape the museum is in financially. Is that unusual? I thought these places all survived from one government handout to the next. It's not a government handout. It's a government investment in culture and heritage. But yes, they do tend to have quite precarious funding arrangements. He thought for a moment. It's all useful information, but I don't see how it constitutes me owing you one. Maitland held out a scrap of paper. I told her that my colleague was keen to ask her out, but he'd never have the nerve, left to his own devices. Bernard looked at the paper. That's her phone number. Yep, her home number. And she said she'd love to hear from you. Really? Yep. And I told her your herpes was back under control since that last set of tablets from the doctor. Bernard blinked. That's a joke, right? You didn't say that. He laughed. Relax, all I actually said was that my colleague Bernard might need to speak to her again and could I have her number. Bernard looked at the paper and smiled. A thought struck him. This is unusually nice of you, Maitland. What are you up to? I'm thinking of our investigation. That museum boss is well dodgy, and considering how much I got out of Lucy in a 5-minute conversation, I reckon a posh restaurant and a couple of drinks inside her shall have told you everything there is to know. That's another joke, right? He shook his head solemnly. Phone her and get that date set up. Time to take one for the team, Bernie.
End of CD 4. CD 5.
Chapter 5. Is this the best you could do in the way of meeting rooms? We're practically sitting on each other's knees. Patterson shifted awkwardly on his seat. They appeared to be in the most compact meeting room that Police HQ at Fettes had to offer. This is all I could find at short notice, said Ian mildly, and maybe you lot could stop antagonising people so much that they want to blow you up, and then we could use your meeting space. I'm not even going to rise to that one. They're only targeting us because Shep are so mollycoddled. They've got police crawling all over their building, and the slack-arsed protesters aren't up to that kind of challenge. Anyway, they've got until 3 o'clock to certify that our building is clear of bombs. Otherwise, we're going to have to relocate the meeting with the Carmichaels to a hopefully slightly larger meeting room here. No problem. Worst comes to the worst, one of the senior brass will relocate and offer up his office. There's nothing we won't do to make our MSPs comfortable. Ian turned to Mona. You're very quiet. She glared at him, her arms folded. What did I do now? You know perfectly. Mona, said Patterson firmly. Let's move on. Let's focus on the task in hand, the Carmichaels. At the risk of sounding like Bernard, Gov, I have some questions. OK. First of all, what does Jonathan Carmichael actually do for a living? He runs his own marketing consultancy, said Ian. I'm not sure that makes it an awful lot clearer. Ian laughed. If you check out his website, you'll see that he specialises in branding, project management, helping organisations develop strategy, that kind of thing. Still not clear? Not desperately, no. To put it another way, he does a lot of behind-the-scenes fixing for his wife and her cronies. You want something sorted out quickly and discreetly? He's your man. He's very well connected, and he knows where all the bodies are buried. Which leads me neatly to my second question. I don't understand why we're being allowed to deal with this. I thought Stuttle would lead on this, or someone senior from Police Scotland. Both Patterson and Ian laughed. Stuttle's not going anywhere near this, whatever we say to them. Mr. and Mrs. Carmichael aren't going to want to complain to someone more senior about the appalling way they've been treated, etc., etc. If Stuttle's here, the only person more senior is a Scottish minister, and nobody wants to be involving them in this. So, we do as full an investigation as we can. They complain, and Stuttle mollifies them. Says he'll have us disciplined, retrained, hung, drawn and quartered, or whatever else she's asking for. The Carmichaels are happy, Stuttle's happy, and we just keep our mouths shut. All right, that did make sense, although she wasn't delighted at her role in the scenario. But why are we interviewing them together? Isn't it all a bit, delicate, Gov? I know, it's weird, but it was their suggestion, not ours. They actually want to be interviewed together. Do they know what it's about? I don't know. Shep contacted both their offices separately. They must have spoken to each other because Carlotta's PA phoned back and said they'd both see us at the North Edinburgh Het office at 4. That's going to be fun, isn't it? Said Ian, asking Jonathan Carmichael about his girlfriend with Carlotta sitting there. I mean, he must know there's a possibility that we've found out. Probably planning to brazen it out. Let's just hope that he's updated Mrs. Carmichael that he's been playing away from home before we broach the subject. Anyway, I suggest we start with me welcoming them, Ian asking what went on at the meeting, then Mona going in for the kill regarding Mr. Carmichael's love life. Thanks, Gov. Be better coming from a woman. I'm really not sure that it would... She was cut off by the sound of Patterson's phone ringing. She sat impatiently while he took the call, his side of the conversation consisting mostly of yes, right, and okay. When he finished, he stood up. That's facilities management to say we've got the all clear to go back. Marguerite's been given a script to memorise in case we get any other nutters phoning up. The facilities manager wants to meet with me tomorrow morning, and from the tone of his voice, I'd say he was holding me personally responsible for today's events. Chapter 6. Please stop glaring at me. I don't see why I should, said Maitland, scowling harder than ever. If you hadn't insisted on checking your emails, we could both be sitting on a bus right now heading home. But oh no, you had to log on. Patterson would have had our guts for garters if we'd just clocked off now, seeing as we can safely return to the office, said Bernard. He stopped to let Maitland catch up. He was taking dawdling to a whole new level. No, he wouldn't. He doesn't know that we got the message to go back. Even the Gov is aware that we can check our email when we're out of the office. We could just say that we couldn't find secure Wi-Fi to log in. The Gov never challenges anything to do with technology. You could tell him anything as long as you mention some technical term. Doesn't even have to be a real one. I once got an afternoon off because I told him the optical thread in my home-to-work connection needed to be reworked. He just nodded like this. Maitland stroked his chin thoughtfully, as if he knew what I was talking about. If you put half as much energy into actually working as you did into skiving, you'd be running your own Het team by now. Perish the thought. Anyway, you need to watch yourself. Bernard stopped again and gestured at his colleague to hurry up. Carol's getting away with murder right now, but Mr. Patterson's not going to take the same nonsense from you. Whatever. They turned into the street that housed the Het's offices. They're still here, said Maitland, pointing to a small group of protesters who were hanging around the park. Are they the same ones as earlier? Dunno. Hard to tell when they've got their faces covered. Maitland looked around. Looks like they've stood down the police protection. No, that's the thin blue line over there. He pointed in the direction of a solitary policeman who was standing in the entrance to the building. I don't think you can call one person a line, Bern. He's more of a thin blue dot. Hey! He waved to the cop, who looked slightly nervous as he headed in his direction. We're Het officers. I believe it's all clear to go back into the building. They both held up their Het ID cards, which the PC looked at in turn. Yep, you're good to go in. What do you make of this lot? Asked Maitland, gesturing a thumb in the direction of the park. "I thought you'd moved them all on." "We're keeping an eye on it. They've been drifting back in ones and twos for the past hour. If I had my way, I'd have their arses kicked right into touch. But you know what it's like at the moment for manpower. There's just me, another guy round the back, and the promise of a rapid response team if it all kicks off again." He paused and watched one of the protesters leave the park and head off down the road. "And to be honest, I'm not sure that the promised response will be either rapid or much of a team. You two ex-cops?" "I am, he's not," said Maitland. "Well, keep an eye on that lot and get yourself down here at the first sign of trouble. If it all kicks off again, I'm going to need all the help I can get." "Well, that was reassuring," said Bernard, returning to his desk. He was always wishing that he'd followed Maitland's advice and not checked his emails. His colleague had resumed his earlier position at the window. "I reckon there's an even dozen of them out there. One cop's not going to be able to stop them if they decide to rush the building." "You think that's what they're planning?" "Don't know, but they've got to be hanging around there for some reason. The plod downstairs was right. We might be needed to help out." "We?" "Yeah, if the building's under threat, we're all going to have to step in. What do you say, Bernie? If it gets a bit physical out there, can we rely on your backup?" He clenched both his fists and started shadowboxing. Bernard's phone started to ring. Saved by the bell. "I'd better get that." "Bernard," he heard the bark of his boss at the other end of the line. "We're all on our way back to meet the Carmichaels. Cameron Stuttle is meeting us at the office, so he can have another look at the box of tricks that Helen Sopel's pal left with you before Mona and I go into the meeting. Can you get them set out for us? We'll be there in 10 minutes. He hung up without waiting for Bernard to agree or disagree with his proposal. "Mr. Patterson and Mr. Stuttle are on their way." He spoke to Maitland's back, but he was busy staring out of the window. "Stuttle wants to see the paperwork Martine Galloway left." "It's locked in the cupboard," said Maitland without turning round. "Keys in my top drawer." "I know." Maitland didn't move. "I'll get it then, shall I? Don't you bother lifting a finger. I'm doing important work here. I don't want the Govan Stuttle walking into some kind of ambush." Bernard headed over to Maitland's desk. He opened the top drawer and rooted around in the sweet wrappers until he found the key. The lock on the metal cupboard was stiff, so he jiggled it up and down until it turned. When the door swung open, he had to step back to avoid being hit. He looked at the shelves one by one. "It's not there." "What?" Maitland made it to his side in one long bound. "Must be." He did the same top-to-bottom sweep that Bernard had made. "Would somebody have moved it? Has Marguerite tied it up?" "Unlikely she'd do it without being asked. She's not generally that keen." "The Gov could have taken it for some reason, although I suppose he would have mentioned he'd moved it on the phone." Bernard grunted. If this had been down to Patterson or Stuttle, the box would have vanished early this morning, rather than just being returned to the wrong shelf. "There is one other possibility. We did have a bomb hoax that meant this building was completely empty." "You think someone has stolen it?" "Well, it hasn't just vanished. And I reckon we've got about 7 minutes to come up with an explanation for where it is before Mr. Stuttle rips our heads off." Chapter 7. In the months that she'd worked for the North Edinburgh Het, Mona had witnessed Stuttle in a state of absolute fury several times. In fact, she had provoked this response on at least one occasion herself. Similarly, she witnessed her immediate line manager move to anger on at least a daily basis. She'd observed on these instances that when incensed, Patterson's face would move through a range of Pantones on the red spectrum, before ending on a rage-induced crimson. Stuttle, on the other hand, grew paler and paler the angrier he became. She'd seen them individually enraged often, and from time to time in a state of fury with each other, but until now she'd never seen them murderously angry in unison. With Patterson puce of face and Stuttle spectral white, it was as if a bar of coconut ice had become sentient, and decided it was one deeply pissed-off piece of confectionery. "What do you mean it's not there? They're supposed to be confronting the Carmichaels with the evidence in—" Stuttle stopped to look at his watch. "Less than 15 minutes, and you're telling me you don't have it." "We think someone took it," said Bernard apologetically. Yes, well, we gathered that, Bernard, but how did they manage to take it? The bomb hoax, said Patterson, slapping his head. Empty building, someone could have been in and out. Not that easy, said Ian. You wouldn't be able to get past the green card machine. It wouldn't be difficult to trace anyone who'd accessed the building. Although currently the emergency exit isn't alarmed, said Bernard. Isn't it? Said Maitland. Yeah, but you'd have to know that. Stuttle stopped. A look of realisation passed across his face. Mona guessed he'd found his culprit. The Gov seemed to know who he was thinking of. And you'd have to know we had it, and there's not many people who knew that. Also, it was under lock and key, wasn't it? And there are only 2 keys. I've got one, and the team have got the other. Yes, so they broke in. Stuttle pushed the door of the cabinet shut. I don't see any sign of forced entry. Actually, Maitland's voice was unusually subdued. We think they took the key out of, a desk drawer. Mona's money was on the drawer in question belonging to Maitland. Stuttle's face paled even further. He looked like he should be on life support. You keep a key to your evidence cupboard in the same room as the cupboard. Jesus Christ, it's like having a bloody bunch of chimps in charge. I would sack the lot of you if there was any chance at all that I'd be able to replace you. Right, well, we'll deal with this stupidity later. Our immediate problem is what you say to the Carmichaels, who I suspect may well know of our predicament. He exchanged a glance with both Patterson and Bernard. What did Bernard know about all this? Mona wondered. She'd get it out of him later. OK, let's recap. What was in that box? Asked Stuttle. Bernard nervously held out a piece of paper. Here's the inventory. Monthly telephone bills for Helen Sopel's mobile, he read aloud, April to August. Right, well, we all know what that one was all about. 1 folk mask, possibly Native American. 1 black and white photocopy of a photograph picturing a woman in 1950s dress. What is all this stuff? Does it make any sense to you? No, Mr. Stuttle, but it must have been significant to Helen Sopel. The phone rang. Mona picked it up. They're here, according to Marguerite. There's only 2 of them. No lawyer, then. Let's be thankful for small mercies. Stuttle shook his head. Well, you better not keep them waiting. Patterson didn't move. What exactly are we going to say to them? Well, you've got things you want to ask Carlotta about the meeting, and when it comes to Mr. Carmichael, you'll just have to improvise. Improvise? Yeah, don't mention the box unless they bring it up. And if they do? Stuttle ducked the question. I've every faith in you guys. You can do this. Oh, God, let's get it over with. The member of the Scottish Parliament for Upper Lithdale and her husband had been installed in one of the larger meeting rooms on the ground floor. Marguerite was fussing around with a flask of coffee. The good chocolate biscuits, the ones with shiny foil wrappers, had also made an appearance. Mona was grateful for Marguerite's efforts, but it was going to take more than quality snacks to get through this meeting. She'd only ever seen the Carmichaels in the Scottish Parliament before. Carlotta was an attractive woman in her 40s, with immaculately coiffured red hair. She seemed smaller than she did when she was commanding the attention of everyone at the Scottish Parliamentary Virus Committee. Her husband was slightly older, tanned, with receding grey hair, and oversized glasses with tortoiseshell frames. Both of them seemed intent on watching Marguerite fluttering around, rather than making eye contact with the Het officers. Patterson swung into action. John Patterson, team leader here at North Edinburgh Het. We've met before. Jonathan Carmichael's face registered a brief look of annoyance. One of the previous times the 2 of them had met was when the then Police Sergeant Patterson had arrested Mr. Carmichael for speeding. Neither man had a great regard for the other. This is Mona White from my team and Ian Jacobson from Police Scotland. Police Scotland? Carlotta raised an eyebrow. What's your interest in this interview? Potential links to a couple of our ongoing cases, Minister? Said Ian, without batting an eyelid. Mona felt a grudging admiration. He appeared to be a good deal more practised in dealing with politicians than she was. Patterson began the proceedings. So, Mrs. Carmichael, the Het is looking for a senior civil servant who has missed her health check, a woman called Helen Sopel. Carlotta looked surprised. I've worked closely with Helen for the past couple of years. Has something happened to her? We don't know yet, I'm afraid, as you're well aware, under the terms of the Health Defaulters Scotland Act. She waved a hand to stop him, her irritation palpable. I understand the confidentiality aspect, Mr. Patterson. I helped to draft the legislation. Of course, and I'm sure in your role as chair of the Parliamentary Virus Committee, you'll also be aware of the deaths of both Nathan McVie and Jasper Connington. Both sets of Carmichael eyes strayed in the direction of Ian Jacobson. Mona guessed that they were wondering if these were the criminal cases he had alluded to. You wouldn't have to be the head of a parliamentary committee to be aware of that, Mr. Patterson. The deaths have been all over the news, both suicides, I've been led to believe. Her eyes rested on Ian again, who refused to be drawn. Were you aware that Miss Sopel was missing? She inclined her head. I had a meeting yesterday with the Permanent Secretary to discuss staffing issues. As you can imagine, we're suffering a severe leadership crisis in virus policy at the moment. We also discussed the continuing leak of information about those staffing issues on Twitter. She shot Patterson a glance. None of which is coming from this office, I can assure you, Mrs. Carmichael. She looked away in a manner that managed to convey disbelief. Anyway, he continued. Mona could sense that any nerves he had had about the interview were rapidly being replaced by irritation. Mrs. Carmichael, on the day Mr. McVie died, he was in a meeting with Helen Sopel, Jasper Connington and yourself. 2 of those people are now dead and 1 is missing. You can see, therefore, Mrs. Carmichael, that it is very important that we know what was discussed at that meeting, and you are the only person who can tell us. I believe you also wanted to speak to me about something, asked Jonathan Carmichael. Annoyance flashed across Patterson's face. Yes, Mr. Carmichael, but I'd like an answer to my question to your wife first. Carmichael held up a hand to stop him, which Mona could see was enraging Patterson further. You'll have to answer in due course, but I think you need to talk to me first. He thought about this for a second. Okay, if you insist. He turned to her. Mona. Thanks, Gov. We wanted to ask you about Helen Sopel, Mr. Carmichael. How well were you acquainted with her? He nodded in a manner that suggested he'd been anticipating this question, then looked at his wife. She sighed. To Mona's surprise, Jonathan took Carlotta's hand in his. I met Helen through my wife's work. We collaborated quite closely on a couple of projects I was working on and, unfortunately I did not maintain the level of professional distance that I should have done. I'm not sure what you're trying to say here, Mr. Carmichael. Helen and I had an affair, a short-lived one. I soon realised my mistake, but Helen, unfortunately. There was a pause. Mona wondered if he was waiting for someone to help him out. After a second or two, when no help was forthcoming, he continued. Helen was very angry with me for ending our relationship and made a number of accusations about me to close colleagues. Carlotta pulled her hand out from underneath her husband's. Hence the meeting at the museum. It wasn't about work as such, more about Miss Sopel and her colleagues making some rather veiled threats about my husband. Threats? They were requesting his removal from any future virus work. What did you say to that? I said I would have to think it over. Carlotta had not made eye contact with her throughout the interview. Her eyes now flicked briefly in Mona's direction. But I haven't been able to give anyone an answer as, obviously, we've been overtaken by events. Mona wondered what to say next. In her head, she'd prepared lots of gently probing questions, lots of ways in which she could slowly reel in an uncooperative Jonathan Carmichael. She'd been prepared to give him enough space to ramble on, in the hope that he would trip himself up. She'd been prepared to ask him outright about his marriage, and had thought of a few tactics to leverage the advantage of his wife actually being in the room. The one eventuality she hadn't prepared for was a full and frank admission of adultery. Jonathan Carmichael had completely taken the wind from her sails. No further questions, Your Honour. Ian stepped into the breach. Well, thank you to you both for coming in. I appreciate this can't have been an easy afternoon. They both looked a little surprised that they were being released. Obviously, we'd like a little discretion on this issue. Jonathan Carmichael got to his feet. Can we assume that it won't be all over Twitter by tomorrow? Absolutely. You have my word, Ian said. I'll just show you back to reception. The Carmichaels both followed his lead and left the room without any further eye contact or attempts at farewells. Mona pulled the door shut behind him. I wasn't actually done there, Gov. I had a few more questions for them, she lied. But Ian got them out the door pretty damn quick. Yeah, but I think we got everything that we needed from them. Did we? Asked Mona doubtfully. Oh, yeah, he nodded solemnly. Now I can believe that Carmichael was shagging around. I heard rumours in the past that he had a bit of a roving eye. I could also believe that Helen Sopel was annoyed with him for ending things. I could equally believe it was the other way round, and that she dumped him, that he was making a nuisance of himself. But I struggle to imagine a minister being summoned to a meeting by a group of civil servants, however senior, so they can tell her off about her man's behaviour. Well, we should have dug a bit deeper. They're not going to tell us, Mona, but you explain this one to me. Why is Carlotta fessing up all this to dogs' bodies like us? I mean, why is she not insisting on a discreet meeting with Stuttle, or sitting there with her lawyer threatening us with all sorts? Why would the pair of them be so open about an affair with an organisation that they suspect of being responsible for a number of recent leaks? They want this story out in the public domain, Mona thought for a second. But that must be completely humiliating for Carlotta. Yep, I also don't believe a word of this affair. I think he's been meeting Helen Sopel about something, and suspects we have evidence, but I don't think it was an affair. And now the box has done a vanishing act, I think that we can assume that the phone numbers were the least incriminating thing in it. We need to work out what that mask is all about and who that woman is. I agree. She thought for a moment. But what could they have been meeting about that is so embarrassing that you'd rather pretend publicly that was an affair? Patterson leaned back, his hands behind his head. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to finding out. Chapter 8. Bernard was pacing. There were only 10 steps between the door of his open-plan living space and hitting the sink and cooker on the other wall. He'd added in further walking potential by detouring into the bedroom, but that floor space could be covered in 6 large strides. Pacing helped him think. He was revisiting a conundrum that he hadn't thought about since he'd been 21. The age-old dilemma. What to say to a girl when you phoned up to ask her out? He'd not had a huge amount of practice. He could remember doing it only twice during his high school years, once asking Maria MacDonald out to a film, and one high-stakes phone call to Katrina Henderson to try to score himself a date to the end-of-term dance. It was some small consolation that he had been successful on both occasions, although he did seem to remember that at the time he'd sworn never again due to the levels of stress it had caused him. The only other time he could remember was a call to Carrie, which had led several years later to their marriage, so he was well aware that phone calls could lead to great things, but you still had to get up the nerve to pick up the phone. He paced from the front door to the far side of the bed and back. How to play this? Was he phoning Lucy to take up her offer of a tour of the museum? Or should he go straight to a less ambiguous invitation out to dinner? He repeated the 32 strides. Did he actually want a date with her? His marriage was only just over. Maybe not even broken beyond repair. And what if he'd misunderstood the situation and Lucy already had a boyfriend? He made the trek from the door to bed twice more. Then decided he was ready. A woman who liked museums as much as he did was just too good a proposition for him not to at least attempt to secure a date. Standing next to the cooker, he could feel the cold of the tiles rising up through his socks. He dialed the number. The card with her number on it popped up against the washing rack. As soon as he'd made the call, he'd go and dig out his slippers. She answered after a couple of rings. "Lucy," he said, just as disaster struck. He'd underestimated how slippery his palms had become as he'd paced and fretted round the apartment. The phone slipped straight through them. He made a grab for it, and in his haste knocked the ceramic pencil holder off the worktop. It broke into pieces, and in the middle of the fragments, Bernard saw something small and silver. He picked it up and rolled it round between his finger and his thumb. He assumed it was a bug, although he'd never seen one before. Though why anyone would bug his home was beyond him. Anything of interest he had to say about the virus would generally be done on the work phone or mobile, which of course were also probably bugged or hacked or whatever it was you did. Why he was being bugged might remain a mystery, but the how was simple. He assumed that the bug had already been present when he'd been given a super thoughtful gift by a friend who had some financial difficulties. What had Marcus got himself into? Chapter 9. Mona drank her tea, trying not to scowl. Since leaving work, she'd been home, loaded up a bag with enough clothes to last a few days, and headed round to her mother's. Her mother's twisted ankle appeared to have had a variable impact on her ability to do household chores. She'd happily cooked them a meal consisting of chicken in white wine sauce, followed by rice pudding, but had then claimed to be absolutely worn out. Mona had put the bins out, stuck a load of washing on, and was sulking in the living room while her mother watched Coronation Street. Her phone beeped and a text message flashed on the screen. Elaine. She quickly turned her phone off, glancing guiltily at her mother, who remained engrossed in her soap opera. After a second's reflection, she realised she was being stupid and turned the phone on again. Her mother would be delighted to know that Mona was dating. Of all the many people who would be annoyed about Mona's current love life, her mother really wasn't one. She swiped back to her text messages. It was the second time today that Elaine had texted. The first one had been a message to say how much she'd enjoyed their date. Mona assumed that this was good internet dating etiquette, but hadn't replied. The lack of response didn't appear to have put Elaine off, as the more recent message was short and to the point. Drink later? The text provoked a range of emotions in Mona, the uppermost one being fear. She knew she'd messed up. Some vague memories of the evening were coming back, and she was pretty sure she'd made all kinds of indiscreet comments about the Het office to Cassandra Doom. Loose lips sink ships, and her career was in serious danger of beaching on a set of rocks of her own making. Her only hope was that her comments had been lacking in detail, that she'd just voiced the usual drunken complaints everybody makes about their boss and colleagues with a bottle of red wine inside them. Or maybe she'd spilled chapter and verse about the Sopel investigation, and Elaine only wanted to meet her to pressure her into going on record about some of them. Underneath the worries that she'd compromised her professional integrity, there was another, deeper fear. She'd enjoyed getting to know Elaine both over the internet and then in their date, right up to the point when she'd ripped off the mask to reveal the right-wing pundit she really was. Mona had been invested in the relationship. She'd been hoping to see her again and take things further. That, too, was scary. She looked up to see her mother watching her. "If you have to go out to work, Mona, just go. I'll be fine here." There was a slight accusation in the tone. "You can't even make it through one evening in my company, Mona. Always running off to work, just like your father." "Well, if you're sure, Mum, I really won't be long." She started typing. Pear Tree, half an hour. The Pear Tree pub was an Edinburgh institution, located bang in the middle of student land. The pub occupied a mansion house that had been built in the 18th century and had moved through various occupancy and near dereliction until it reopened in 1982 as a public house and beer garden. What the ghosts made of the behaviour of the modern-day students was anyone's guess. Mona had chosen it because it was a 10-minute jog from her mother's, and, more importantly, as she wasn't a student, she thought it very unlikely she'd meet anyone she knew in there. Her intention was to have one soft drink, try to establish if she'd said anything indiscreet on Monday, then to suggest apologetically to Elaine that it might be for the best if they never saw each other ever again. She marched into the beer garden, heading for the wide set of stairs that led up to Pear Tree House. "Mona." Elaine was sitting on a bench, stubbing out the remains of a cigarette. Filthy habit, I know. Shall we head inside? Yes, okay. Mona could feel her heart starting to race. She took a breath. In, find out what she said, deal with it, home listening to her mother moan by 9 p.m. Elaine took the initiative and offered to go to the bar. Mona grasped the opportunity to choose a corner table and to have a good look round the room to make sure there was no one there that she knew. By the time Elaine returned with Mona's requested Coke and a pint of cider for herself, she had reassured herself that they were as good as alone, and she began to relax. "Do you usually drink cider?" asked Mona. "No, but when in Rome." Elaine waved a hand at the room. "Actually, I haven't been in this pub for years. My show isn't too popular with a lot of your more liberal-minded students. Too young to know any better, most of them." "Yeah, about your writing. I really enjoyed our meal together, Mona." Mona could feel Elaine's ankle brushing against hers. Accidentally, she assumed. It was the first time in years I'd actually had intelligent conversation on a date. Elaine's calf was now pressed against hers. She considered it unlikely that this was accidental. She should probably move if she was going to keep all this professional, but on the other hand, she didn't want to antagonize her. The soft warmth against her leg was making it quite difficult to concentrate. "How was it for you, Mona? I do hope you had fun." For the second time that day, Mona felt as if she were in an interview that she wasn't really in control of. "The thing is, Elaine, I think I may have said some things I shouldn't about life in the head." "Like what? Do you mean the things you said about the attitude of your manager, Patterson? Was it? Or the fact that Shep starved you of the resources to do an even halfway decent job, while maintaining, what did you call it, their fuck-off massive office suite on the high street?" Mona cringed. "Relax," she laughed. "You weren't telling me anything that I didn't already know. Obviously, I'd love it if you wanted to go on record about some of these issues, but really, I'd rather have another date with you. What do you think?" Mona said nothing. Another date would be a very bad idea for many reasons. She wasn't exactly a world authority on dating, but she did know that successful relationships were invariably built on mutual trust and respect. She had very little respect for some of the views Cassandra Doom espoused, and was extremely clear on exactly how little she trusted her. But, on the other hand, now that she was here, a large part of her very much wanted to reach under the table and run her hands right up under the ridiculously figure-hugging skirt that Elaine was wearing. "Do you believe all that shit you say when you're being Cassandra Doom?" "Every word, darling." Mona moved her legs firmly to her own side of the table. "You look so disappointed." Elaine laughed. "Come on, nobody believes everything Cassie says." Mona disagreed. She thought there were some people who hung on Cassandra's every word and were more than happy to turn her words of hatred into deeds. "So why do you do it if you don't believe it?" "I do believe some of it. I do think that your health checks are an invasion of our civil liberties, and I do think that Cameron Stuttle is a self-serving arse. But Cassie's been good to me. I've got a profile that most journalists would kill for." Mona didn't say anything. "I do also write sensible investigative journalism as well, if it makes you feel any better. Although nobody reads that. Cassie just seems to be what people need in these difficult times." "I should probably go." Mona reached for her bag. "How's the investigation into Helen Sopel's disappearance going?" She froze. I didn't tell you about that." "You didn't," Elaine grinned, "but your reaction to my question just confirmed my suspicions. The answer should have been, who's Helen Sopel?" Mona wondered if she should resign, then remembered she couldn't. Stuttle and Patterson were going to make her life a misery. "You didn't tell me, Mona, but you did mention you were looking for a civil servant. I just put a few calls into civil servant friends to see who hadn't turned up for work recently. Sounds like a cracking story. 2 suicides and a missing person." "She's a health defaulter. You can't mention any of this in the paper." We might not be able to print chapter and verse, but Cassie's lawyers are very adept at advising what we can and can't allude to. I could run home right now and dash off 200 words of pure innuendo about trouble at the top of the Scottish virus tree, and the lawyers would have it okayed in time for my column tomorrow. But don't look so worried. Elaine's legs were pressed against hers once more. I want to see you again, Mona. I want you to trust me. I'm not going to breathe a word of your little investigation, not unless you tell me that I can. Hello, I thought it was you. Mona jumped. There were two girls standing by the table. One of them had short, spiky hair, which seemed to have been decorated with bluey, silvery dye and a nose stud. The other, with long brown hair falling in spirals, looked slightly familiar. Then she said, I'm Kate, Maitland's girlfriend. Of course. Shit. Kate looked over at Elaine, obviously expecting an introduction. This is, Elaine. Elaine McGilvery. Kate's friend stepped forward. Mona took in the nose ring, then the blue hair. If she'd drawn a picture of the very opposite of a Cassandra Doom fan, Kate's friend was pretty much exactly what she would look like. And she appeared to know exactly who Elaine was, which meant that, before the night was out, Maitland would know about the company she'd been keeping. Guilty as charged. She raised her glass to them. I hate your column. Kate's friend stood with her hands on her hips. You do nothing but spout hate for everyone and everything. You should be ashamed of yourself. She pulled at Kate's arm. Come on, let's find somewhere else to drink. Kate looked confused, but let herself be led away. Bye then. As she walked off, Mona could hear her asking her friend what all the fuss was about. Oh, God. She rested her head in her hands. Don't worry about it. Happens to me all the time. I am worried. That was the girlfriend of one of my colleagues. What if she tells him who I was with? Well, I dare say you will lie and say that you had no idea who I was until Kate's friend made a scene. But your column tomorrow, Mona, I can assure you I am not about to mention anything that we discussed. She reached across the table and stroked Mona's cheek. Relax. She brought her other hand up, gently pulled Mona toward her, and kissed her. She tasted of apples. Thursday, Beneath the Mask. Chapter 1. Bernard strode purposefully into the office, having stopped en route to purchase the smallest, sturdiest screwdriver that the 24-hour Asda had on offer. For the second day running, he had made it to work by 7:30 a.m, and he was confident that today, at least, he would have the place to himself. He'd do what he had to do, then treat himself to a well-deserved large egg and spinach roll to celebrate. He dropped his bag by his desk, pulled off his coat, and was raking in the pocket for his new purchase when he heard a cough. He spun round to see Mona watching him with a slightly amused grin that she often wore when eyeballing him. Morning, early bird. What are you doing here? Bernard was trying not to look irritated at her presence in what should have been a completely deserted space, and was, he suspected, failing miserably. I work here, and I have a lot to do, seeing as we seem to be no nearer to finding Helen Sopel than we were on Monday. Not surprising, given that we've had to deal with a bomb hoax and our evidence seemed to suddenly have grown legs and scarpered. But nonetheless, I'd like to get the whole thing wrapped up and move on to something a bit less controversial. He turned his back on her and walked to his desk, cursing the fact that everyone suddenly seemed to have developed a taste for early starts. You sound a bit on the grumpy side, Mona. Maybe you need to go and get a cup of coffee. Way ahead of you. She waved a takeaway cup at him, and the grumpiness is all natural, not a result of caffeine deprivation. He was unwilling to have his mission thwarted. Another half hour and Mr. Patterson would come storming in, and he'd stand no chance of a moment's peace. He positioned himself in a way that prevented Mona seeing what he was up to, and got out the screwdriver. He slowly slid the metal tip in between the plastic seams. What on earth are you doing? Bernard jumped and narrowly missed impaling himself on the hyper-tough soft grip flat 3.5 mil. Jeepers, Mona, why are you sneaking up on me? Because you were being weird. I wondered what you were doing. She paused. Actually, what are you doing? Nothing. Yeah, right. You're in here at the crack of dawn and obviously well peed off to see me here. Her eyes narrowed. You're not the evidence thief, are you? Of course not, he sighed, giving in to the inevitable. Opening his hand, he showed her the screwdriver. I found a bug in my flat. He returned to his levering. I want to see if there's one here as well. Don't. Mona grabbed his hand. What? Why? She gestured toward the door and he followed her. Once in the corridor, she stopped and looked round. If you take the bug out, whoever planted it there will know that you found it. Her voice was low. True. Taking his cue from her, he whispered back. But why is that a problem? Because this gives us an opportunity to find out who put it there. Bernard thought he probably knew the answer to that. And if we put some misinformation out there, I'd be really interested to see where it ended up. This could be the source of our Twitter leaks. Okay. He had to admit that it was a good idea. Why are we discussing this out here? Because if there are bugs in the phone, there's also a possibility that there are other bugs in the office. Don't mention this to a soul, Bernard, until we can work out what's going on. I don't know. Maybe we should tell Mr. Patterson if we find something. No, not a word to the Gov until we know what's going on. But Bernard wasn't a natural rule breaker, and he was pretty sure that if you found a listening device in your workplace phone, you were duty-bound to report it. But Marcus, despite his current idiocy, was a good friend, and if he was behind the bugging, then he didn't want to get him into trouble. Maybe he should talk to Bryce again. Maybe he should talk to Marcus. Earth to Bernard. Sorry, okay, I'll keep mum, and I won't do anything that will alert him that we've found his bug. His bug? Mona hissed. Whose? Bernard, do you know something? Morning, troops. Patterson swept past them. Why are you skulking in the corridor? Mona leaned in close to him. I want to know everything. Patterson reappeared. Are you two not coming in today? Yeah, Gov, we're coming. She shot Bernard a look, then followed their boss in. He cursed himself for his stupidity. No one should ever trust him with a secret. Although maybe telling Mona about Marcus wouldn't be such a bad thing. She could usually be relied upon to come up with a solution to any given difficulty. While he saw a problem from so many different angles, he ended up unable to make a decision. Mona was usually good at getting right to the heart of it and suggesting a plan of action. He might actually tell her, although maybe he shouldn't involve anyone else in this. There was a lot to think about. You're in early, Gov? Yep. He headed into his office and they could hear the sound of the kettle being put on. The facilities manager wanted to meet me at 8 a.m. to point out my many failings in response to yesterday's events. Your failings, Mr. Patterson, said Bernard. The Het are the only tenants of the Cathcart building. If anyone's at fault, I personally think the facilities manager is. I've been working here 9 months and we've never had a single evacuation drill. As far as I'm aware, the admin team have never been given any training on how to deal with bomb calls or other hoaxes. And we've obviously become a bit more high profile over the past week or so. So really, Shep should have given some consideration to security concerns. Patterson emerged from his office. Stop there, Bernard. Once again, his views seemed to have upset his boss. Sorry. To his surprise, Patterson waved his regrets away. You've absolutely nothing to apologise for. I just came out to tell you it's your lucky day. Really? Given that so far he'd nearly stabbed himself with a sharp implement and had rattled out his friend to Mona, and was now so hungry he could hear his stomach impersonating a lion, he couldn't say he'd seen any evidence that today was shaping up to be particularly auspicious. Yes, congratulations. Patterson took his arm and shepherded him in the direction of the door. You've just won a visit to the facilities manager. Lady Luck returned to her usual place in his life and resumed filing her nails. I didn't, did I? Yes, certainly did. When we meet him, I want you to spout all that guff again, as firmly and authoritatively as you can. And he still hadn't had any breakfast. Oh dear. Barry Gifford, facilities manager for a number of NHS properties in Edinburgh, did not look like a man to be trifled with. He was short but sturdy, with dark brown hair and a moustache, and was wearing a blue short-sleeved shirt with a tie. "Nice to meet you, Barry. I'm John, and this is Bernard from the HET team." He gave Patterson's hand a cursory shake and nodded in Bernard's direction. "Well, I have to say I'm not happy about this situation. Not happy at all." "Neither are we, Barry, I can assure you. Now, our main concern is what you're going to do to rectify it." Barry's moustache quivered up and down with outrage. "What am I going to do? Me?" "Well, you are the facilities manager." Bernard suspected Patterson was enjoying this. "While my health enforcement team are only tenants of the Cathcart building." "Yes, but..." "And as tenants, we have certain expectations about the way things are done. I'm a little bit concerned that we haven't, to the best of my knowledge, had an evacuation drill." "Now, wait a minute. I have to think about the safety of my staff. Has your admin team ever had any training on how to deal with threatening communications, such as calls about bombs on the premises?" Patterson was really getting into his stride. Bernard wasn't sure whether he should feel proud of inspiring his boss or worried that he'd created a monster, some kind of facilities manager baiting behemoth. "I mean, I don't have to tell you we've become pretty high profile over the past week or so. So really, you should have been reviewing your policies in light of these security concerns." "You're damn right you don't have to tell me that." Barry Gifford's patience had run out. "I never wanted you people here in the first place. I said to management, once you've got police moving in, you need a police level of security in place." "We're not actually Police Scotland," said Bernard. "You might as well be. You're staffed by ex-coppers. You attract student protests and hoax calls. We never had that before you lot moved in." "Barry, Bernard didn't get to hear Patterson's response to Barry's assessment of the situation, because the door to the meeting room flew open. Marguerite was standing there, a sheet of paper quivering in her hand. It was a young woman, I mean really young-sounding. "What woman? What's all this about?" asked Barry. "She didn't have any kind of accent that I could hear." "Marguerite!" Patterson managed to get her to stop. "What are you talking about?" "The phone call, Mr. Patterson. We've had another one. They're saying there's a bomb." "There's not really going to be a bomb in there, is there, Gov? I mean, we had all this rigmarole yesterday and it turned out to be nothing." Bernard trailed after his colleagues as they evacuated the building under the no-nonsense direction of Barry Gifford. He couldn't help but notice that people weren't hurrying quite as fast as they had been yesterday. "I'd have to say I agree, Mona, but every time we get a phone call, we have to go through this. How often do you think they're going to pull this trick? We're never going to get any work done at this rate." He sighed, all his earlier good mood vanishing. "At least there's nothing left for them to steal." Bernard hurried after him. "Who do you think's making the calls, Mr. Patterson?" "Well, I had this down as part of a conspiracy to interfere with our evidence. Our visitor from yesterday swears blind it was nothing to do with him, although I have to say I'm not entirely sure I believe him." "Who visited yesterday?" "Mind your own business." Bernard caught her eye and got the message loud and clear that she'd have that piece of information out of him as well. People really should stop involving him in secrets. "I remain open-minded about whether yesterday's hoax was a deliberate attempt to get us out of the building so that the box could take a walk, or whether we were all being evacuated and someone saw their chance and took it. And if you're about to say who, don't bother because I've no idea." "And today's call?" "No idea. I wouldn't be surprised if it's linked to that lot." Patterson jerked a thumb in the direction of the straggly band of protesters who had returned to the park. None of them looked to Bernard as if they were the type to phone in a bomb threat. One of them saw him staring and made a rude gesture in his direction, further confirming his view that they were all about direct action. Spray painting the building, brick through the window, yes. Complex plots involving bomb threats as a cover for stealing evidence in a health defaulter case, not so much. Patterson continued with his theory. Either they did them both or saw yesterday's palaver and thought it looked like a good wheeze. And I'll tell you something else. That Barry Gifford had a good point this morning. We should have the same level of security on that building as you'd have on a police station. Although it's not like you can just walk in off the street, Gov. You need to go through the green card barrier, then reception. Yeah, Patterson said. But what background checks do they do on people who work in the building? How much do we know about who's working in the other offices? True, Gov. She turned to Bernard, and he knew her mind was going back to their earlier conversation about bugs. You'd better let Ian Jacobson know there's no point in rushing over here. Mona pulled a face. What? He was a pain in the arse when I told him about the previous bomb threat. I can do without another set of smart aleck comments. Why didn't you text him? Said Bernard. Her face brightened and she immediately began tapping on her phone. Cheers, Bernard. Where are Carol and the idiot boy? Patterson eyed up the crowd of office workers milling around. I don't think Carol or Maitland has shown up yet. Mona checked her watch, although it is only 9:15. Patterson snorted. Which is 1:15 when they're supposed to be here. Bernard looked round for any sign of his errant colleagues, but saw only a young man in a slightly scruffy grey suit walking straight toward them. Bernard didn't recognise him, but the man seemed to know Mona. He tapped her on the shoulder and she spun round, her face registering surprise. The young man spoke. I need to talk to you.
End of CD 5. CD 6.
Chapter 2. Simon, Mona's civil servant contact, piled 2 lumps of sugar into his tea, stirred it vigorously, then sat gently tapping the spoon against the red vinyl tablecloth. Nice calf, Gov. Never been in this one. Mona regarded their surroundings. They weren't what you describe as fine dining. In fact, they were definitely on the greasy spoon side of things. But, in her opinion, none the worse for that. They do a great bacon roll. Patterson's eyes flicked in the direction of the kitchen. Maybe later. Anyway, Simon, you had something to tell us. Simon's arrival had intrigued her, but she was trying not to get her hopes up. Their investigation seemed to have stalled, but in her experience, the more you hoped for a breakthrough to land in your lap, the less likely it was to actually happen. Yeah, he fiddled with his spoon some more. I mean, I don't want to keep you if you need to get back to whatever it was. It was a bomb hoax, and we've got it covered. Bernard had been left in place with strict instructions to come and get them if required. He'd made some protest about not having had breakfast yet, which had been swiftly overruled by Patterson, on the operational grounds that someone had to keep watch, and it wasn't going to be him. Maybe she'd take him back a fried egg roll. Say what you need to say. Annika is being a nightmare. She is your boss. She's allowed to be a nightmare. She smiled. Making their staff miserable is a boss's job. Patterson raised an eyebrow. I know, and it's not like she wasn't a pain in the ass before all this kicked off, but now it's like she's morphing into Helen. She's doing all the same kind of secretive stuff. Like what? Phone calls, ones which she doesn't want to take in the office. Could be lots of reasons for that. Boyfriend, hospital test results. In theory, yes, but I know there's more to it. He played nervously with the spoon again, and Mona had to resist the temptation to rip it out of his hand. I may have done something stupid. He dug into his coat pocket and pulled out a mobile phone, which he placed next to his teacup. Patterson and Mona eyed it. Is that Annika's? Yes. He pushed it toward them. She was itching to pick it up, but forced herself to keep her hands on her lap. Technically, that's theft. I see myself more as a whistleblower than a thief. Whistleblower? Is there something of public interest on it, son? Patterson's fingers were inching toward it. I think so. In fact, I'm pretty certain that there's stuff on there that's relevant to your investigation. Isn't it password protected? Mona was now actively sitting on her hands. It is, but I guessed it. The PIN code is Helen's birthday. He looked pained, which I find kind of creepy. It is a little. She didn't even know Patterson's exact age, never mind his date of birth. So what did you find? She's got a whole lot of calls and text messages from this one number over the past couple of days. Doesn't say who the number is, but I can guess from the context. Helen Sopel? Yep. Patterson's hands were either side of the phone. Does it say where she is? I haven't looked at them in detail. Mona wasn't sure she believed this. There are lots of texts about picking up food and supplies, but I didn't see anything like an address. But I thought you'd have IT specialists, and if I handed it over to you, you might be able to figure it out. What do you think, Gov? Can we take it? Patterson's hands were edging closer to either side of the phone, like an army of fingers performing a pincer movement. I think we can make it a public interest defence for our accepting it. Mona reached out and pocketed it before he changed his mind. So, asked Simon warily, I'm not under arrest or anything for taking it. No, but please talk to us before pinching anything else, said Patterson, his stern expression not quite masking his excitement at getting the phone. Will Annika be under arrest if it turns out she's hiding Helen? Simon asked with a cadence to his voice that was distinctly hopeful. We'll see, said Mona. Bernard's face appeared at the window. He gave her a thumbs up, then pushed open the door and headed swiftly in the direction of the counter. Looks like we can go back, Gov. I'll be off then. Simon stood up. Thanks for your help. Mona stuck out a hand. He shook it, bobbed his head at Patterson, then slunk furtively out of the cafe. Have we had the all clear, Bernard? Asked Patterson. Yeah, egg roll, please. He put his order into the bored-looking woman sitting behind the Formica tabletop. To go, shouted Patterson to the kitchen. What's the story? Barry Gifford interrogated poor Marguerite about the call. She'd filled the call sheet and faithfully noted that the caller was a young girl and everything, but there wasn't a box that asked if she could hear all the caller's pals giggling away in the background. So it was just teenagers mucking around. Looks like it. Oh, thank you. He bit into his roll with delight. This tastes so good. Anyway, Barry Gifford was furious with Marguerite, which, in my opinion, is a little bit unfair because she was doing her best. I think you've got him all riled up this morning, Mr. Patterson. Good. He needs to get all this nonsense knocked on the head. I'm not getting kicked out of my office every time some bored teen wants a bit of a laugh. Anyway, Marge will be getting the tea and sympathy from the rest of the admin team. She'll be fine. Mona eyed Bernard's sandwich. Couple of bacon rolls for the road, Gov? Why not? The office was already occupied when they returned. She couldn't see what was on Maitland's computer screen, but Carol's browser was open at Facebook. She didn't rush to close the page, and if Patterson saw it, he opted not to comment. Colleagues, glad you could join us, eventually. Patterson pointed in the direction of the metal cupboard. Anything else go walkabout while we were out of the building? Nothing left for them to take, Gov. Maitland yawned, a wide-open affair that afforded everyone a fine view of half a dozen fillings and a set of tonsils. Late night? Asked Patterson. Yup. He sat up straight. Interesting story, Gov. I was out with Kate last night. Mona sensed where this was going. She sat down at her desk, bracing herself for the full wrath of her colleagues when they found out the story about Cassandra Doom and her unlikely drinking buddy. Thanks for sharing, Maitland. Now, step to it. No, Gov, you need to hear this. It relates to those leaks we've been having. I think I might just have found the source. Patterson stopped in the doorway to his room. So, I caught up with Kate about 10 o'clock last night. She'd been at some Christian nonsense or other with her lefty mate Lindsay, who does my head in. So I told Kate to give me a call when Lindsay went home. We had a great night in the pub, but once we get back to my flat, Kate starts talking about seeing my colleague Mona out on a date with a woman. Good for you, said Bernard. That's not news, Maitland. That's Mona's private life. Bernard's right. That's absolutely none of our business. Patterson finally went into his room. Mona wondered whether to make a break for it. Maitland could spill the beans. She'd give them time to digest the news, and then she could come back all guns blazing in an hour or so. It was totally up to her who she dated, or in this case, didn't date. Maitland raised his voice so that Patterson could still hear him, whether he wanted to or not. And Kate said that Lindsay had been all upset because the woman Mona was with was some right-wing nutjob commentator. Of course, Kate couldn't actually remember the name of the woman, but after a long internet search, I find out that my colleague is dating none other than Cassandra Doom. The room was silent. Mona spun round on her seat and stared Maitland out. He glared back. "That can't be right," said Bernard, his tone wavering between confusion and hope. "Mona?" The silence stretched on excruciatingly until she gave in. "I've seen her twice." Patterson went into his office, slamming the door of his office shut behind him. Almost immediately he reappeared. "Give me the phone." He beckoned to her. "What?" "Give me Annika's phone." He stretched out his hand. "Now." She slowly reached into her pocket for it and handed it to him. "Why?" "As far as I'm concerned, you're a security risk." "Damn right," muttered Maitland. She felt a wave of fury rising up from her feet. "You can't be serious." "I'm deadly serious, I can assure you. Bernard, check out the contents of this phone. See if it says anything relevant to Helen Sopel's whereabouts. Report anything you find directly to me." He pointed at Mona. "And not to her." She looked round at her colleagues. Maitland and Patterson were still glaring at her like she was public enemy number one. Carol and Bernard were avoiding catching her eye. She stood up. "I'm going out." "Good." As she walked down the corridor, she could hear Bernard's voice. Whose phone is this, Mr. Patterson?" Chapter 3. "That's awful." "I know." "No, Maitland, I mean really, really awful." His colleagues were huddled round Maitland's computer. Bernard didn't know what they were up to, but he'd put money on it not relating in any way, shape or form to the search for Helen Sopel. He wondered if he should point out to them that Patterson was in an extremely bad mood at the moment, not likely to be improved by coming out of his office and finding them messing about. "Bernard, you have to see this," said Carol. "What?" "Cassandra Doom's columns," Maitland joined in. "They're appalling. I was up until 3 a.m. reading them. I just couldn't stop, Bern. Each one was worse than the one before. I'll look at them later, once I've got some work done. Why are we spending millions trying to keep our prisons free of the virus? We should be encouraging it. If it wipes out a few freeloading criminals, that's a saving to the public purse." Maitland read aloud from the screen. "It doesn't really say that, does it?" "It does," Maitland yawned, "and that's one of the more liberal headlines." Bernard was sorely tempted. Patterson was bunkered down in his office. Before retreating, he barked some instructions about the phone, which Bernard hadn't really understood. He had thought he would be able to work out who the phone belonged to and what he was supposed to be doing with it once he turned it on, but fell at the first hurdle when he discovered he needed a PIN number. He'd have to risk Patterson's wrath and ask some follow-up questions before he could do anything useful with it. But thought he'd give him 10 minutes to calm down before braving his lair. He might as well have a look at the articles. He turned round, but he'd spent too long thinking about it, and Maitland and Carol were now giggling over something else. Suddenly, Maitland got up and headed out. Bernard saw that his jacket was still there, hanging on the back of his chair. Carol, on the other hand, was putting her coat on. "You're going out?" he asked. "Good guess, Bernard. What do I say if Patterson asks where you are? Don't say anything, or tell him a complete lie. I really don't care." She smiled, giving him a wave as she left. As the door shut behind her, the office felt unnaturally quiet. After a second's adjustment, he decided he was quite happy with the piece, so he could process what he'd just learned. Mona, the colleague whom he highly respected, if not actually entirely liked, was dating one of the people that he most despised on the planet. With a quick eye to Patterson's office to make sure he wasn't about to appear, he typed Cassandra Doom into a search engine and watched as a string of articles popped up. "It's called the National Health Service. Time to clamp down on virus tourism. Enough is enough. We need to cut back on the so-called refugee orphans, claiming that their parents are virus victims." The articles went on and on, there was no aspect of virus policy that Cassandra appeared to think was immune to abuse by benefits claimants, foreigners, or left-wing, Britain-hating politicians. Carlotta Carmichael was a sock puppet of righteousness, committed to protecting the citizens of Scotland from the idiocies of her own policies. Ouch, he muttered to himself. Cameron Stuttle was an over-promoted plod who shouldn't be in charge of a country hospital, never mind a national health emergency. Oh dear. He could see why Maitland had spent so long surfing the articles. They were quite addictive. As well as her feelings about the Het, she was quite consistently vitriolic across a wide range of topics, with a particular emphasis on the shaming of people who were overweight or underweight. He took a deep breath and entered Cassandra Doom Het in the search engine. Big Brother Health Police planned. A new agency is being created to police people's health behaviour under the pretext of the virus. What a cock-up! The Keystone Cops staffing the health enforcement teams messed up big time today. He cast a further eye in the direction of his boss's office and typed, Cassandra Doom, John Patterson. It only returned one response, relating to a particularly rough time that his boss had had at the Parliamentary Virus Committee. He read the article from beginning to end and sincerely hoped that Patterson wasn't making the same internet searches as him. The many derogatory comments about his boss's intelligence, competence and commitment in the article would no doubt annoy him, but Bernard reckoned it was the several references to his weight that would really have him spitting tacks. He tried again to bend his mind around the situation. Cassandra Doom would love to have an inside source on the Het, but if Mona was passing information to her, why wasn't she using it in her articles? If Cassandra wanted information about Het disasters, he was sure that Mona could supply her with daily evidence of incompetence, and there was nothing in any of the articles that he'd read that seemed to be based on North Edinburgh Het investigations, and the current leaks had ended up posted anonymously on Twitter. If there was one thing that you could be sure about with Cassandra Doom, it was that she wasn't shy about people knowing her opinion. So while he might not approve of Mona's taste in women, it was a bit of a leap to her being a mole. A part of him felt almost disappointed at the thought. When Maitland had accused Mona of leaking the information to Cassandra Doom, his first thought had been relief that the leaks weren't coming from Marcus after all. He could go back to thinking of his friend as a slightly unworldly geek, instead of a bankrupt gambler willing to sell his colleagues down the river for the chance of one more round of poker. Guilty as it made him feel, if one of his colleagues was leaking information, he'd rather it was Mona than Marcus. The door to Patterson's room flew open. How did you get on with the phone? Actually, Mr. Patterson, and this Mona stuff. He stood in front of Bernard's desk, frowning down at him. What do you think? Is it true? Well, Mona didn't exactly deny she was seeing Cassandra Doom, or whatever her real name is. Uh-huh. But, Bernard continued, I don't see Mona leaking any information to her. I think she is really loyal to the Het. Well, loyal to you at least. I could imagine Mona getting fired up about some real injustice, but not leaking the kind of low-level innuendo Cassandra Doom specialises in. Patterson didn't exactly nod, but inclined his head to one side to show that he didn't entirely disagree. It could be stuff she said by accident, you know, pillow talk. This provoked a mental image that Bernard swiftly pushed aside. She did say she'd only seen her twice. He grunted. Well, we'll see. Anyway, the phone. It belongs to Helen Sopel's deputy. You didn't tell me what the PIN code is. Apparently it's Helen Sopel's birthday. I assume we know that. I can get it from her green card. But is it just the day and month, or day, month and year? And if the year is included, is it 4 digits or 2? I don't know. Give them all a try and tell me how you get on. He looked toward the door. Do you think Mona went to the canteen? I should maybe go and speak to her. I think she was a bit upset when you called her a security risk. She might have gone a bit further afield. He grunted. Well, I'll give it a try anyway. Bernard listened to his boss's footsteps recede and be replaced by complete silence. He had a brief opportunity here to complete a task he'd started last night, before he'd become distracted by phone bugs. He picked up his phone, remembered again about potential bugs, and pulled out his mobile instead. He contemplated it for a second, wondering if it was any more secure, then decided he had to use some method of communication, and before he could change his mind, quickly typed in Lucy's number. Hello? Oh, hi, Lucy, this is Bernard from the health enforcement team. We met yesterday. Oh, yes, I thought you might be in touch. He smiled. She remembered him at least. Maybe she'd been waiting for his call. I was wondering if you'd be available to meet up tonight, maybe get some food. I was thinking the stuffed pepper at 7 p.m. Yes, I can do that. Her tone was solemn. Delighted as he was to hear the word yes, it wasn't quite the joyful acceptance he'd hoped for. Is there anything I need to bring with me, Bernard? How do you mean? He'd been intending to pay, so she didn't need to bring any cash. Unless she was the kind of woman that liked to pay her own way, which he could totally respect. Or did she mean something else? Oh, God, how much had dating changed since he'd last swum in that particular pool? For your investigation, she clarified. Is there anything I need to bring from work? Oh, no, oh, no, oh, no, oh, no. She hadn't realised this was a date. He desperately tried to think of a way to correct her, but nothing sprang to mind. No, just yourself is fine. See you at 7. He hung up and sat staring dejectedly at his phone. Maitland made this kind of thing look so easy. He'd have to tell her about the misunderstanding as soon as he got there. It would be completely unethical to do otherwise. He could be accused of misusing the power vested in him as a het officer, although, now that he thought about it, it would take some of that first date pressure off. Maybe he'd consider what to do over the rest of the afternoon. With renewed vigour, he returned to Annika's phone and put the PIN code in successfully. Now, what's your secret? Chapter 4. Mona rode out of the building on a tidal wave of fury. Security risk. She'd done nothing wrong. The het had the right to her full attention between the hours of 9 and 5 and nothing more. It didn't have the right to police how she spent her evenings, and it certainly didn't have the right to tell her who she could and couldn't become romantically involved with. Although if she was honest, if Maitland had walked in one day saying he was dating Cassandra Doom, she'd have questioned his judgment, she'd have questioned his sanity, and Cassandra's. She jogged out of the building, dimly aware of several heads in the admin department turning to see who was going past in such a hurry. She wondered if Maitland had got round to passing the news on to them yet. That would be a joy to deal with. Although she suspected they'd be far more interested in the fact that she liked a woman than who that woman actually was. She could picture a future conversation with Marguerite, involving a lot of questions that she really didn't want to answer. As soon as she was out of the building, she picked up her pace and sprinted round the corner to the newsagents. Daily Citizen, please. The middle-aged Asian woman behind the counter handed it to her. You in a hurry, love? Little bit, thanks. She opened the paper on the counter and flicked directly to the Cassandra Doom column. Cassandra was on fine form, ranting about the NHS, the new double yellow lines on the street near her house, and the state of education in Scotland. She had nothing, however, to say about the health enforcement teams in general, and not a word about the North Edinburgh het in particular. Even more importantly, not a single line referenced missing civil servants. Mona heaved an inward sigh of relief and started to laugh. Must have been a good joke. The shop owner peered at the page in an attempt to see what her crazy customer was finding so funny. Something like that. She waved goodbye to the shopkeeper and headed out, pausing only to pull out her mobile and turn it off. Bernard might be right about the phones being bugged, or he might be completely paranoid. But either way, the leaks had to be coming from somewhere. Who knew what tracking software had been included in her het-issue mobile phone? She didn't want anyone cyber-stalking where she was, or who she was talking to, so for the next couple of hours, she was going AWOL. She headed to the main street in nearby Newington. She passed the charity shops, off-licences, takeaways, vintage clothes emporiums, and the other retailers meeting the needs of the local student population, ignoring them all until she saw what she needed on the other side of the road. Dodging through the traffic, she dived into a shop selling mobile phones. The buzzer sounded as she pushed open the door, and the young guy behind the counter, all tattoos and piercings, looked up. Something about him struck her as familiar. His eyebrows shot up when he saw her, suggesting that he recognised her too. If there was a mutual connection, he didn't acknowledge it. She suspected they'd crossed paths in her former life at Police Scotland. She approached the counter. "I'd like a pay-as-you-go phone, just a cheap one, and a SIM card." He reached behind him. "How about these?" He placed a slightly battered-looking phone and a pre-packaged SIM card in front of her. "The phone's recycled." He watched her nervously as she picked up the phone and gave it the once-over. "OK, I'll take it." She placed 2 £10 notes on the counter, sincerely hoping she hadn't just bought stolen property, and got out as quickly as possible. She peered back through the window. The shopkeeper was leaning against the back wall of the shop, one hand on his head, the other hanging limply at his side, radiating relief. He definitely had her down as police. He'd have been insanely stupid to have sold her a dodgy phone. If the day ever came when she returned to CID, she'd be asking a few questions about this particular shop. Putting the transaction out of her mind, she ducked down a side street, looking for a quiet place to assemble her new purchase. After a minute's walk, she spied an empty bench. The SIM card was duly inserted into her new old phone, and she dialed Elaine's number. "It's me, Mona." There was a moment's pause. "Well, hello. I wasn't sure I was going to hear from you again after the speed with which you galloped out of the pub last night. I thought you might be the kind that smooches a girl then never calls." The memory of kissing Elaine's soft cider-drenched lips came into her mind. "Can we not talk about that? Anyway, I wanted to say I read your column, and I kept my promise. Are you phoning to say thank you? Do you want to see me again?" She laughed, a throaty rasp that Mona remembered from their first date. "Of course, darling. I thought I made that clear enough yesterday. Then I'm going to need a favour." There was a moment of dead air. "I'm not sure I work like that." Mona was silent in return, and after a second, Elaine gave in. "What is this favour?" "I need an address for someone." "Who?" "Alexander Bircham Fowler." "The Professor? Interesting. Any chance you could tell me why you want to speak to him?" "No." "This is a little bit one-sided for my liking, Mona." She felt a sudden burst of anger. "Forget it then. Sorry I asked." She ended the call and threw the phone into her bag. Almost immediately she regretted it. Talk about a bull in a china shop. Elaine owed her nothing. In fact, she'd already sat in a story just to save Mona's blushes. It was a bit much to phone up and demand that she do her another favour. And what had made her think she was such a great prize that the promise of a date with her would get her a no-strings-attached act of kindness from a journalist? She groaned. Her hand hovered over her bag as she considered phoning back. Maybe later, she thought. It was nearly an hour since she'd stormed out of the office. Was that enough time for her colleagues to have calmed down? She didn't feel entirely composed herself, but then maybe while she was still fired by fury, she should go back and stand her corner with Patterson and follow that by finding Maitland and telling him where to shove it. She'd tell them both that she didn't need to run her romantic choices past the Het staff. She could date who she liked without permission from her co-workers. She wasn't sure that she did either like Elaine or want to date her, but they didn't need to know that. If she was going to confront them, it was time to get it over with. She started walking back in the direction of the office, retracing her route through Newington, although this time she crossed the road to avoid going past the phone shop. A police car shot past, sirens blaring, and turned into the street where her office was. She picked up her pace, changing to a slow jog. It was probably nothing to do with the Het, but given the events of the previous day, she was a bit twitchy. A minute later, a further police car shot past, and this time Mona started to seriously worry. Given the Police Scotland manpower crisis, police cars travelling in pairs was a rare sight, and unlike magpies, it was rarely two for joy. Something was up. Another bomb hoax? Something worse. Her jogging turned into full-blown sprinting. She turned the corner at speed and crashed straight into Bernard. "Mona, thank God!" For a moment she thought he was going to hug her, but he settled for a pat on her shoulder. "What's going on?" "Bomb hoax." He jerked his head in the direction of the group of people from their offices who were being shepherded away from the building by the police. "Yet again." "Again? Probably more teenagers messing about. Should we get out of here until we get the all clear? Head to a cafe or something?" "No." He looked surprisingly distraught at her suggestion. "We can't go. I need your help to get back in there." "There's been a bomb threat. You can't just nip back in." She regarded him suspiciously. "Why do you need to get back in there anyway? What have you done?" His expression resembled that of a schoolboy caught smoking behind the bike sheds. "I was looking at Annika's phone when the threat came in." "Oh, God. Please tell me you secured it before you came out. The facilities manager was shouting at me and I panicked and... Bernard!" He looked miserably at his feet. "It's lying on my desk. I really, really need to get back in there. Help me sneak in somehow." "You can't go back in. You could die." "It's not going to be an actual bomb threat, is it? It's much more likely that it's a ruse so someone else can get into the office and steal the phone, which only you, Patterson, and I know about. What about the bugging? It's probably all over Twitter by now that we have it." "Possibly, but even if it is, you can't chance going back in. Negligible risk of death in there." He pointed at the building. "Out here, odds-on certainty of me being executed when Stuttle and Patterson find out I've lost another piece of evidence. Still, Bernard," he pointed at the building again. "I repeat, negligible." His voice was drowned out by the noise of an explosion and two of the windows on the first floor blowing out. There were screams from some of the crowd as broken glass rained down on the heads of some of the bystanders. Even above all the noise, Mona could make out the caterwauling coming from Marguerite. "What just happened?" She looked round at the crowd, as if there was someone who could actually answer the question. "They blew up the head office." Bernard's complexion had paled to the colour of milk. "We're obviously a target now. We've upset someone very important, and now there's a vendetta against us." "But we're on the second floor. It's the first floor that's on fire." She did a quick calculation in her mind and worked out which room had been targeted. She felt a large hand on her shoulder. "You two okay?" asked Patterson. His eyes were darting between the building and the crowd. "We're fine, Gov. Any sign of the others?" "I haven't found them yet. Either of you know where they went?" "They both went out earlier," said Bernard. "But look!" He pointed over Mona's shoulder. "Here's Carol coming. She looks pretty upset." "Maitland, is he here?" Carol shouted as she ran toward them. "No." Mona looked at her in surprise. "We assumed he was with you." Carol shook her head vigorously, her long hair shaking around her. "I think he's still in there." "Not possible," said Patterson. "They evacuated the building when we got the phone call. He would have heard to come out." "No, he wouldn't." She bit her lip. "He went for a sleep in the third-floor conference room. He was going to lie under the table so that no one could see him. And I said I'd cover for him if anyone asked where he was. I thought it would be okay if I nipped out for half an hour." "For what? A meeting with your lawyer? Anything happens to that boy, I'm holding you responsible. This is your fault." Patterson started running in the direction of the fireman at the building entrance. He shouted back over his shoulder, "You and your bloody attitude." Carol buried her face in her hands. "Oh, God, what have I done?" Mona put an arm round her shoulder and watched Patterson gesticulate the story into the face of the fireman. There was a flurry of action, and 3 firemen disappeared into the building. Her new phone beeped. With her free hand, she pulled it out of her pocket. She had a text. Elaine had sent her an address. Chapter 5. "Bernard, I need to do something. Now." He was only half listening to Mona, too busy staring at the mess on the first floor. Smoke was pouring out of the broken windows, but there were no visible flames. It looked like the firefighters had it all pretty much under control. If Maitland really had been on the third floor when the explosion happened, surely he was in with a chance. "Yes, sorry, can you handle things here?" She gently shoved Carol in his direction, and he took over half-heartedly, comforting her, patting her on the shoulder. Yeah, okay. Text me the second you hear about Maitland. Of course. He suddenly realised that Mona was leaving. Where did you say you were going? Will you be long? He looked round, but she'd vanished. What's taking them so long? Carol sniffed. They know exactly where to look for him. They might need to put out the fire before they can get him, which will be causing a lot of smoke in the stairwell. And we only know where he was when the explosion took place. He could have tried to get out, hit the smoke, got disorientated. He stopped, sensing that he wasn't being as reassuring as Carol would like. Oh God, the smoke could kill him before they get to him. If he's any sense, he'll barricade himself in somewhere and wait for help to arrive. I'm sure Maitland has well-refined self-preservation skills. He probably trained for all this at police college. Carol clutched his arm, her eyes big and wet with tears. What if the smoke killed him before he even woke up? Patterson was right. It is my fault, all of it. I've been egging Maitland on these past few days, encouraging him to mess about. It was my idea that he should skive off to the conference room. I said I'd cover for him, and then I went and left the building without telling him. She buried her head in his shoulder. I feel terrible. There was an almighty explosion, Carol. They probably heard it all the way to the Scottish Parliament. Even Maitland wouldn't sleep through that. A tall, thin figure appeared in the doorway to the building, supported on either side by a firefighter. Is that him? Yes, it is. It's him all right. He's here, Carol, and he looks okay. He's upright at least. Oh, thank God. She removed her face from his shoulder. Do you think he'll hate me for this? Maitland is a grown-up. The only person responsible for him being in that building was him. He might not see it like that. Well, we should go and find out. I think they're taking him over to a medic. If Maitland gave Carol any grief about this, Bernard was going to have his say. They made their way through the crowd, most of whom were still staring at the smoke in shock. A couple of policemen were trying ineffectually to persuade the gawkers that they might want to move slightly further away from the building, in case there were any more explosions, but the lure of social media pics was just too great. Bernard took Carol's arm and shepherded her through the sea of camera phones to the ambulance where Maitland was being treated. He was sitting on the back step of it, wrapped in a blanket with an oxygen mask on. Oh, Maitland! Carol threw her arms round him. The paramedic gently removed her. We're still running a few tests. Give him some space. What the fuck happened there? Maitland pulled his mask off, then started to cough. A bomb hoax. That wasn't a hoax, I'm guessing, said Bernard. Keep your mask on, pal. Your lungs have taken a bit of a hammering. Maitland waited until the paramedic's back was turned and took it off again. Please say you didn't tell Patterson I was asleep in the conference room. I had to. Carol dabbed at her eyes. We didn't know if you were okay. You could have been dead. I was fine. I shut myself in the third-floor toilet with a damp towel along the door. I knew you'd tell them to come and get me. Carol let out a small sob. Which is exactly what Carol did, said Bernard, the first moment she could. Her head returned to his shoulder and he patted the top of it. Couldn't you have lied and said I was working up there for some peace and quiet? Asked Maitland. I couldn't think that fast. Her voice was muffled. We were worried and I thought they might not look under the table if I didn't say that's where you were. You said I was under the table? Oh, God, I am so screwed. He wasn't wrong. Maitland's powers of self-preservation might have been well enough developed to save him from deadly smoke, but they were going to have to work overtime to get him out of a meeting with his line manager unscathed. Patterson would never have bought you disappearing off there for peace and quiet anyway. Now that Maitland was safe and well, Bernard felt happy to resume hostilities. He knows you're bone idle. Bernard, I'm going to... He started coughing, and the paramedic reappeared and pointedly snapped his breathing apparatus back in place. Oh, crap, muttered Maitland under his mask. Bernard followed his sightline and saw Patterson's Stuttle hove into view. He took an involuntary step backwards. This wasn't going to be pretty. You, Patterson pointed at Carol, get out of my sight. After a final anguished look at Maitland, she hurried off. Give us a minute, will you? Stuttle said to the paramedic. He placed his hands on his hips and let out an exasperated sigh. I'm not sure he's fit to talk. He'll be fine. I'll take full responsibility. The paramedic debated for a second whether to pursue this, then, seeing the expression on Stuttle's face, decided not to. Keep it short. I want to get him to hospital. Stuttle leaned in toward Maitland and gestured Patterson and Bernard to join him. He spoke very quietly. This will be all over the internet by now. I already have a press conference set up to discuss the two hoaxes in less than an hour's time. And now this. He struggled for a word. Fiasco. People will want answers from me, and I don't know what's going on. Tell me what's happening here. What makes you think we know anything? Patterson put as much grievance as he could into his tone, while still whispering. It wasn't even our offices that were blown up. Are you certain it was aimed at us? There's nothing else going on in the building that is remotely controversial, as you know, John, unless there's someone out there with a grudge against NHS statisticians or the staff of the National Breastfeeding Campaign. Actually, people do object to— Shut up, Bernard, whispered Stuttle and Patterson as one, in both timing and level of irritation. OK, sorry. Anyway, continued Stuttle, the fire was in the room housing the server, which a pretty restricted number of people have access to. Like IT staff, thought Bernard, but surely Marcus couldn't be behind this. It wouldn't make sense. Selling information about the virus or the Het might be lucrative, but what was to be earned by blowing up the server? And although it looked like the explosion wasn't aimed at hurting anyone, there was so much potential for it going wrong. Marcus wouldn't be so cavalier with the health and well-being of his colleagues and friends. He just wouldn't. But they have successfully banjaxed the entire computer system for the building, which may not be unrelated to whatever they are trying to achieve. Patterson gave Bernard a punch on the shoulder, which he probably intended to be gentle. Seeing as we can't get back into the building, why don't you go and chat to your daft prick mates over at IT and double-check they haven't blown them up as well? OK. He was going to give Marcus a good grilling about all this. A thought occurred to him. Will we be able to retrieve anything from the building? Depends what it is. I think you need to assume that any personal effects you left behind are trapped in there for the moment. Helen Sopel's phone is in there. Stuttle raised an eyebrow at him. Secured in the metal bomb-proof cupboard, I trust, with the key to said cupboard stored somewhere else. I didn't quite have time for that, but it is secure. He could feel himself blush as he lied. We're going to have a proper talk about the storage of evidence when this is over. He pointed at the building. Talk to the head fireman. Say I authorised it. And John, you're coming with me. To the press conference. Since when was I an asset at those? You're not an asset. I just want someone to blame when it all goes tits up. Chapter 6. Mona hailed the first taxi she saw. Quite a commotion back there, love. The driver grinned at her in his mirror. Yeah, she suspected some conversational misdirection was going to be called for. The last thing she wanted was to have information about the blast spread across Edinburgh through the ever-effective cab driver gossip network. I heard it was an explosion on the first floor of the Cathcart house. Must be some nutter with a grudge against that health check team. Her skills of evasion obviously weren't going to be required. This guy possibly knew more about what had happened than she did. I mean, I'm not a fan of the health checks myself, love, but folk are just doing their job, you know what I mean? Yeah, agreed totally. How did you hear about the explosion? Heard the kaboom sound. He took both his hands off the wheel to illustrate his comments with a mime of an explosion. So I had the radio on to see what the story was. BBC Scotland is all over it. Really? News travels fast. She wondered what the journalist's take on it would be. Cameron Stuttle was probably busy telling anyone from the press who'd listen about a gas leak or an overheated server. Twitter, on the other hand, would have a full range of opinions tending to the view that the explosion was a top-level conspiracy. Somewhere in between, the truth was lurking. Certainly does these days. It's the internet, isn't it? People will have had pictures of the explosion on the Facebook as soon as it happened. Given that there was a park full of protesters opposite the bomb site, that was pretty much an inevitability. She'd have to get Bernard to give her the rundown on who Twitter were holding responsible for the attack. The thought of how she'd deserted him sent a dart of guilt through her. She scrabbled in her bag to find her work mobile. As soon as she turned it back on, 2 text messages arrived from Bernard. Maitland walking wounded, but still being very annoying. She smiled. Maitland's ego appeared to have survived intact, at least until Patterson dealt with the whole issue of him nipping off for a kip in the middle of the working day. She breathed a huge sigh of relief. She'd be the first to admit that Maitland was annoying, and she wasn't done with him over the whole Cassandra Doom thing. But still, she'd have hated to see any of her colleagues hurt. She checked her phone for other messages and was surprised to see that she had multiple missed calls from a number she didn't recognise, all of which had arrived in the last hour. Someone must have heard about the explosion and was concerned about her well-being. "All right if I cut through the park? It's the quickest way at this time of day." "Yes, whatever you think." She puzzled over the number. She hadn't given Elaine her work number, although as a journalist she was sure she could get it. But then, why bother when she had other ways to contact her? With a burst of conscience, she wondered if they could be from her mother, who she really should have phoned to tell her that she was okay. Not that her mother possessed a mobile, or actually understood how they worked. Perhaps she heard about the explosion when she was out and about, and had persuaded some random stranger to phone on her behalf. She hit her mother's name in the address book. After several rings, her mother picked up the call. "Hello? Mum, it's Mona. I'm fine." "Of course you are." Her mother's voice was a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Why are you phoning just to tell me that?" The taxi slowed down, scanning the rows of stone-built terraces. She searched for a street name and realised she'd reached her destination. "Watch a news bulletin, Mum. See you later." She pressed long and hard on the doorbell, and in response a chime sounded somewhere inside the building. This was followed by rapidly approaching footsteps, and a second later the door was yanked open. "Hello, Professor." His face showed no surprise at all at her arriving unannounced on his doorstep. "Mona, thank God." He stepped forward and enveloped her in a bear hug. "You're not hurt." Over his shoulder, she saw Teresa in the hall. "I thought you hadn't seen him in months." "People lie, Mona. A person of your age and intelligence should have figured that out." Teresa pushed the professor to one side and gave her a hug, albeit a much more restrained one than Bertram Fowler's. "I'm very pleased to see you. We've been phoning you, but you weren't answering. We heard about the explosion at the head offices, and this silly old fool thought he'd got you killed by involving you in things that he really shouldn't." "What things? Do you mean Hilda Millwood?" The professor answered by closing the door behind them. "Come through to the kitchen. I'll make some tea." "Was anyone hurt in the explosion, Mona?" asked Teresa. "One colleague was still in the building, but not badly hurt. I don't think the bomb was aimed at loss of life, though. It seems to have been located in the room that houses the server." "To disrupt your IT?" asked the professor. "Well, that would be pointless, Sandy." Teresa gave him a look. "These things are all backed up off-site, like it was at the university." "You're right," said Mona. "We wouldn't have lost more than a few hours' work." "So why blow it up?" "The important thing, Sandy," said Teresa impatiently, taking over the tea-making duties, "is that it wasn't targeted at people. So despite your unfortunate comments to Mona, she wasn't in any danger from the blast." "But you do think the explosion was connected to Mrs. Millwood?" she persisted. The professor and Teresa looked at each other. The professor appeared to be silently asking her permission for something which, from the look on Teresa's face, was being firmly denied. "At least tell me what the phrase means." Mona was completely losing her patience. "When you heard about the explosion, you thought it might have been targeted at me, because you told me something you shouldn't have. But even now, you won't even tell me who Hilda Millwood is. How do you know that you're not putting me in more danger through my ignorance?" "Oh, Sandy." Why did you start all this? Teresa slammed the lid onto the teapot. If I'd delivered my speech, if I hadn't taken ill. Ill? Ha! He sighed. All right. If I hadn't been stopped from making my speech, either by nature or by human intervention, everyone would have known about it. Millwood would have been on the front page of every paper, and all these internet sites. When we parted, Mona, I didn't realise that I was putting you in a difficult position. His eyes, surprisingly blue and clear, gazed into hers. But if you want to know, I will tell you. Sandy, shush, Teresa. I'm not the man I was, we both know that. Whatever brought it on, I did have a heart attack. And I have responsibilities and commitments that I didn't have when I was going to make my stand. I'm not going to go public with what I know. Not while Maria is pregnant. And these people, he spat out the words, could do her harm. Teresa slammed 2 cups down in front of them, but didn't try to stop him speaking. I will tell you what I know, and what you choose to do with it is up to you. He paused, as if expecting her to speak. Thank you. So, the most important thing that you need to know about Hilda Millwood is that she doesn't exist, at least not in real life. But over the years she has become a kind of shorthand, a motive, if you like, for, oh, for goodness sake, Sandy, get on with it. Teresa sighed irritably. If you must tell her all this nonsense, at least start with the film. I was about to tell her about the film. He gestured over his shoulder toward the kitchen. That woman is impossible. Anyway, back in the 1950s, when the Cold War was at its height, there was a suite of public information films about the situation, of which Protect and Survive is the most well-known. If you were a very senior civil servant, you would have watched a training film called Thrive and Prosper, which examines some of the eventualities that might arise if a nuclear attack was launched on Britain. You can watch that kind of thing on the internet. I guarantee you that this particular film is not on general release. No, you had to be someone pretty high up to have seen this one. The main thrust of it was that the great and the good might not make it to the shelters on time, and some hoi polloi might actually survive. Because of the geographical isolation, or because of some genetic quirk that made them resistant to radiation. Crazy idea, of course, but it was a long time ago. So, Thrive and Prosper dealt with the scenario that when the world was being rebuilt, the people in charge may not be of the same. He paused for a moment. Caliber, as the existing top brass. The film was to prepare them for a world that might not be run by whoever was left, like Hilda Millwood. A woman, Mona. Teresa's voice came from the depth of the kitchen. Imagine how terrifying that thought must have been for them. The professor grinned. Mrs. Millwood was a housewife with 2 young children, acted no doubt by some fine young Radha actress with received pronunciation. But all of that is but a footnote on history, important for one reason only. Mrs. Millwood became a kind of in-joke for the members of the upper echelons of the establishment. This developed into the concept of Millwood orders when, for whatever reason, decisions were taken by people much more junior than would normally be making them. Like in a pandemic situation, if all the cabinet were stricken, the civil servants would step in, asked Mona. Exactly. At least that's how it started out. When the virus first became a problem, there were certain emergency measures put in place, some of which continue, such as restrictions on the size of groups that are allowed to meet. Other restrictions, such as the closure of schools and the late-night curfew, were so unpopular that they were abandoned as soon as possible. And some measures, such as the establishing of the Hets, were unpopular but tolerated as a necessary evil by most of the population. He paused again, and she nodded her agreement with his analysis. We live in a democracy, the professor continued. The government of the day, even in an emergency situation such as our current predicament, needs to take some heed of what the population will tolerate. Our approach is different from countries with a more, say, directive leadership than our own. China, for example, has had some quite extreme restrictions on people's freedom of movement. But the virus doesn't recognise government structures. It doesn't care if you're a democracy, dictatorship, or whatever.
End of CD 6.